end of the track that like no one comes.
Yeah, seriously. All right, welcome to the YouTubers as well. Oh, let's see if I can share my screen. Share screen, share, endless death. Okay. All right. Yeah, small group. Hey Jim, can I get you to watch the YouTube for questions or comments, or one of you two? There's nobody in there yet, so I doubt there'll be any comments.
I was like, are they having anybody monitor it? I'm just
I think Greg was doing it. Yeah.
Greg was here last time.
Greg was here last time. He did it.
Yeah,
So.
that was great.
All right.
I was in Georgia. Nobody can hear.
Nobody can hear. Oh, I hope you can hear. I thought I fixed the mic.
Whoa.
Still good.
Now they can hear. Heard that?
Still good. All right.
Wait, are you sure? Because the
little mic thing is bouncing. I mean, somebody can put their headphones on and see, but this is.
yeah,
it
was bouncing last time.
Well,
but they
someone
couldn't.
join the YouTube and figure it out. I can't, otherwise it'll feedback craziness. Huh?
Okay, hold on.
All right. Has anybody not been here before? I think everybody's been. They all look familiar. So, so this is the last meeting of the DevOps track, or the continuous delivery track. We went over chapter 9 and chapter 12 or 11?
12.
12, yeah, 9 and 12. So 9 was around testing non-functional requirements, and 12 was dealing with data migration. So, and then we're also going, it's unfortunate we have such a small group. I guess we're going to get to just pick it ourselves because there's not enough people to vote. But
why is that unfortunate, Brad?
We're going to vote on the next track once we get through the topic for tonight. So we have some ideas, and so, get some ideas in your head about what you might want to see in the next track that will start next month. So like always, everyone's been here. If you have any questions to start out, feel free to jump in. We both agreed, Scott and I agreed, that the unfortunate choice in my reading was that I said 9 and 12, thinking that 10 and 11 would not have been interesting. But it turned out that 10 was the most interesting chapter that I've read so far in the book. So if you haven't read 10, if you didn't happen to read 10, I highly recommend it. It's much better than I anticipated it to be. There was some really cool stuff in there. We're not really going to go over it here, but we just want to mention.
What was that one on?
Deploying and releasing applications. They talked about like canary deployment strategies, and there's some cool stuff. So, but I thought chapter 9 was good too. I had a lot of underlines here in 9 about how to test these non-functional requirements. It's not something that, I don't know, I don't see a lot of people do it. I don't know if you guys do it in what you're doing. I just don't see a lot of people have a formalized non-functional requirement testing strategy in place. So I'm just going to go through some of my notes, and then we'll just jump in from there. You can hear me okay? Yeah, all right. I'll just go through some of my notes, and we'll do like always. Does anybody have any other questions before we start off? Stuff about last month or anything about this month? No? Okay. So there was 3 key terms that they talked about in chapter 9 for testing non-functional requirements, and that was performance, throughput, and capacity. And he made a point to define what those 3 terms meant. And he referenced Michael Nygaard, who wrote Release It, and what Michael Nygaard's definitions are of those 3 topics, or those 3 terms. So I thought that was pretty straightforward, but it was good to understand. The one that he said is the word performance is usually used as a catch-all. Somebody just says this thing needs to perform well, but they may be talking about it needs to have high throughput, or it needs to have high capacity, or it needs to have, and what he said is performance is the measure of the time taken to process a single transaction. So when someone says this thing doesn't perform well, is it really that it can't do a single transaction, or doesn't perform well when it's under load, or that sort of thing. And so I underlined something on the very first chapter, or the very first page of the chapter on 225 at the end. Basically the last, in the printed book, the last sentence on 225 says, some projects fail because they go to the other extreme and worry so much about the NFRs that the development process is too slow, or the system becomes so complex and over-engineered that no one can work out how to develop efficiently or appropriately. So I've actually, in my experience, that's the scenario I've seen more than the former. Most of the time when people didn't think about NFRs and didn't think about capacity and throughput, they generally, more than half the time, they've been fine. They've built the system and it's just been fine. when the people thought about it in the beginning, I've said most of the time I've seen that that's been a problem. It's just been over-engineered. I don't know if that's
it goes down to the rule of optimization. What is it called? Is it the rule?
Prematurely optimized?
Yeah, and he has that in here. He has it in here about
Don't optimize.
premature
and
optimization
then
in action.
Rule part B for experts only.
Yeah.
Don't optimize yet.
Yeah. And that's that specifically is a quote. Well, that quote he has on 228 from Donald Knuth. He says, forget about small efficiency. We should forget about small efficiencies about 97% of the time. Premature optimization is the root of all evil. Yet we should not pass up our opportunities in that critical 3%. A good programmer will not be lulled in complacency by such reasoning. He will be wise to look carefully at the critical code, but only after that code's been identified. So that was kind of a recurring theme here. He said, here's how you measure capacity. Here's how you measure throughput. Here's how you measure performance. Here's some things you can think about. You shouldn't do any of this until you're sure you actually have a problem. And one thing he mentioned at least twice, I thought it was on the second page, but at least twice he said high capacity systems are by their nature simpler. The code is simpler. It has to be simpler. He makes some allusions to basically functional programming concepts, but he doesn't call it that. And he just says they have to be and not cause side effects and perform one thing and finish that one thing and be able to perform that one thing repeatedly. So he's basically talking about kind of a functional programming approach. And he says that just makes life simpler. I really like what he said on 227 about analyzing non-functional requirements. And he was, again, talking about how developers tend to overthink it. And they tend to say that, like he's talking about, in this case, auditing. So a non-functional requirement that things should be audited, it might say something like all important interactions with the system should be audited. But that really isn't that relevant to him. It's too nebulous. And he made a point of saying they're trying to avoid cross-cutting concerns. He wanted to be able to compartmentalize that requirement so it can be its own task. And so he said, we would rather capture the requirements from the perspective of an auditor. And he says, what would a user in that role like to see? We simply describe the auditor's requirements for each report that they want to see. And then that drives the functionality, and those features can be captured as an individual task. So rather than saying every single feature that you write needs to also include some sort of auditing, and now you've basically got two tasks to complete, the task you're trying to complete and the audit portion. You should instead say, approach it from what the auditor wants to see. And once you understand what the auditor wants to see, then you know only what you need to audit. So I thought that was pretty cool. And how's it going? On 228, he says, he's kind of talking about the misconception about performance. And somebody says, all user interactions should take less than 2 seconds to respond. That's what they mentioned. And that is really hard to quantify what that means. And he went through some iterations on, well, what if it's this? What if it's that? What if it's this? And at the very end of it, he said, some of these things, what many people often mean when they say respond in 2 seconds is, I don't want to sit in front of a computer without feedback for too long. And so what he really said is that's a usability problem. Usability problems should be addressed separately as their own task. That may not even need to be a performance fix. The simple thing might be put a progress bar up. Right. You know, put little dots up, and that's cheaper than trying to optimize the heck out of one line of code. So I thought that was, again, I think a lot of, like Scott said, a lot of these things are pretty obvious, but he wrote them down in pretty good ways. 229 is where he mentions that, in fact, code written for high capacity systems is by necessity simpler than the code written for everyday systems. Complexity adds delays. He did mention the blocked threads anti-pattern on 231. I thought was good. He says, he mentioned a scenario where they were working on some system and they needed to process like hundreds of thousands of transactions a second. And the key to making that system work was to make it single threaded. And he said, you know, be extremely careful about threading. A key way to achieve it is keeping the core of the application single threaded. The block threads anti-pattern is the proximate cause for most failures, leading to a chain of reactions and cascading. So I'll paraphrase sort of my understanding of the block threads anti-pattern, but it's basically that while you can spin off multiple threads to do the processing, at some point those threads have to come back together in most cases. And when that happens, they're going to have to wait for the other ones to come back together. And now they're just sitting there. So now, even though you did processing in parallel, you've still got 10 threads sitting and waiting. And so all those performance gains on the processing you gain, you're waiting, you lose it back in the block. So the overall time is the same or worse.
Yeah, another problem related to that same thing is you've got a server and it is processing things on multiple threads, and one thread goes down and you don't really notice, like there's a crash in the thread, and you don't have terminate immediately on background crash or whatever on. So one thread goes down and the server just starts performing a little bit worse, and then another one goes down and just a little bit worse, and pretty soon they're failing exponentially, because now single threads are having to handle the load of all of the other threads, which have now been crashed. And rather than having the process should actually, if the threads are crucial to the process, when the thread crashes, the process should crash so that you have some sort of feedback mechanism that bad things are happening.
Right.
Without it like continuing to run, but not be able to do any work.
And we actually talked to a customer the other day. They had a scenario where they were describing a performance issue to us, and we started to get deeper down the rabbit hole with them. And we said, okay, you have a throughput issue with the number of incoming requests that you can handle is too small. And you appear to have a latency issue because the amount of time that a single request can take to complete is taking too long. And those are separate issues. And what we found out was that, yes, we could increase, in this case, it was ASP.NET web-based stuff, and we could increase the throughput issue by implementing async and await was basically what we said. We said if that request was asynced, then the request would come in, and now with 4.0, maybe they started 4.5. Anyway, we use async. They're able to use what's the word I'm looking for? Operating system
Completion port.
Completion ports. And that completion port just says, oh, okay, go ahead. I'll give that thread back to ASP.NET. It can continue to process. And when that operation is done, I'll pick the thing off the OS completion port and send it back. So old ASP.NET, it would hold that request thread open until the request finished. So you ended up with a throughput issue. Eventually, all the threads were eaten up in the thread pool, and no more requests coming in could get handled. So he said, yeah, do async and await. That'll massively increase your throughput. The problem is now you'll just have hundreds of people waiting, because the thing they're waiting on still is too slow. And so you don't actually, and they said, well, we're only handling like 200 or 300 requests at a time. I said, you don't need to increase your throughput. You need to fix the latency issue. And so it wasn't, they were thinking, oh, well, if we just multi-thread or whatever, maybe we can fix it. We said, no, if you actually just fix the amount of time it's taking for that request to complete, then everything will be fine. So, so anyway, I thought that was good. He mentions Michael Nygaard, Release It multiple times here. If you haven't read Release It, it's a good book. I think that you should. So a lot of good stuff.
Arnie disagrees with you.
Arnie disagrees. Well, that's fine. I thought there was a lot of good stuff on 230 and 231. I underlined one term because I hadn't heard it before. I thought it was pretty funny. The top of 230, he says, writing high-capacity software requires more discipline than other types of systems and a degree of mechanical sympathy for how the underlying hardware and software works. I thought that was pretty funny. I hadn't heard mechanical sympathy before, but he has a bullet point, like our strategy to address capacity problems, and he has 8 things. And number 3 says, encourage clarity and simplicity in code over esoteric, I don't know how to pronounce that word, but over esoteric crap. Never compromise readability for capacity without an explicit test that demonstrates the value. So again, he says, simple code is usually faster. Just make it simple and easy to read. Don't over-engineer it. Don't overthink it. Definitely don't do anything until number 7. He says, use profiling tools as a focused attempt to fix problems. So you don't just say, make it fast as possible. That shouldn't be your general strategy. Your general strategy should make it simple, make it readable, make it maintainable. And then if you have a problem, then use a focus test to find exactly where the bottleneck is. He mentioned somewhere specifically, he said developers are really terrible at understanding where the bottlenecks in their code are. They make the wrong guess.
Developers are like entirely focused on code reuse too, right?
On what code? Oh, reuse?
Like they value the drive principle over everything, right? Over readability, over performance, over simplicity, as long as they don't have to rewrite like one line of code.
Was it in here?
Write 3 lines of code to prevent rewriting 1 line of code. Yeah, that's true. And that, I mean, you could argue that that if you follow the dry principle, it can be more maintainable because you only have to change it one spot, but it can actually end up being a little more, I don't know.
I think you lose understandability. I mean, I think that's what you're trying to get at, is so you can cross a threshold of understandability where it's like you who refactor that out knows where it is and no one else does.
Yeah.
And then 6 months later, you've forgotten to.
Right. So yeah, I like the point that he said, developers are terrible at understanding where the bottlenecks are. So keep that in mind. And I mean, again, in my experience, I almost never think about performance in writing the code. That just never enters my brain. I just say, well, whatever. Like there are some big, broad strokes where it becomes important to think about it, but the simplest code usually is fine. and for the longest time, until very recently, when you're dealing with like cloud architecture, for the longest time, it was still cheaper to just throw more RAM and more hard drive space and more CPUs in a box than to fix a performance problem. That's maybe not the greatest thing, but the reality was, being a pragmatic programmer, a stick of RAM is $20. A refactor of that code is thousands and thousands of dollars. I'll just throw a stick of RAM in there and deal with it for now until it's a problem. It's harder now that you're in the cloud and you're kind of inherently going across machine boundaries, and you have to build like, you know, services that can be functionally pure, and you know that makes it difficult right off the bat.
And they're charging you $20 for that stick of RAM every month.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a different, you know, when you're in a load balanced environment, it's a different animal that you're approaching. But even still, the simpler the code, the easier it is to load balance. But we're dealing with a legacy .NET application right now, one of our projects, and like kicking and screaming our way into Azure to be decoupled from a single box. It's basically one behemoth web server box, and there's so many problems with that. The biggest of which is it's really hard for us to roll out anything in. So if you read chapter 10, he talks about the canary release pattern of you have a load balanced set of servers and you put one in the load balancer that has the new version as the canary, and then a subset of your users will be hitting the new server. And if shit hits the fan, take the canary out of load balancer and only a slice of your users are affected. It's impossible to do a canary release strategy on this behemoth box. It just physically will not work on another box. There's no way to make that happen. So that is not great. That was back in the day, that was fine, but now there's better ways to approach it. So we've got to slowly.
You were mentioning dry and how people think that is the end all be all. And there's a phrase that I heard recently, which is damp trumps dry. Have you heard that?
I think I've heard that, but I don't know what damp is.
Descriptive and meaningful phrases.
Yeah.
The readability of code trumps
Trumps.
don't repeat yourself.
Where is that? That's the Stack Overflow.
I
Well,
was reading about optimizing indoor humidity,
yeah.
too low or too high. You're gonna have problems.
Anyway, it was the first time I had heard that damp, descriptive and meaningful.
What does
phrases.
damp, not dry mean?
Yeah.
It's a balance, not a contradict. Descriptive and meaningful phrases promotes the readability of code. Don't repeat yourself, promotes the orthogonality of code.
Doesn't it induce mold?
Multiple orthogonal lines. No.
Yeah, good try. Okay. So he mentioned a couple times, 232, he mentions it's vital to include scenario-based testing into our capacity testing strategy. So there are times in a project where, this is the end of 231, the beginning of 232. He says, he's talking about the different approaches to measuring capacity. How do you set down what your baselines are for capacity? And he says, sometimes they are things like how many transactions per second can a database store, or how many messages per second can the message queue convey. There are times in the project when these benchmarks are of value, but most of the time they're academic compared to more business-focused questions like how many sales per second can I handle given regular usage patterns? Can my predicted user base use the system effectively at times of peak load? So that goes back to the last meeting or the meeting before. We talked about BDD tests, scenario-based testing, integration level testing. We're writing down what the user's expectations are and performing automated tests based on that. He kind of reiterates that here. Even for capacity testing, it makes more sense to prove to your stakeholders that you can do 10,000 sales per second or whatever than you can handle 10,000 messages in a message queue, because they're not going to know what that means. So So their opinion is vital to do scenario-based capacity testing. The interesting thing there is we've never tried it. I've never tried to hook BDD tooling into capacity testing.
I have.
How do you do it?
So this was on the Viewpoint project, and we were using the Visual Studio.
Nice segue.
Yeah, the Visual Studio performance tools, and basically using that, you describe a scenario, and then you say, I want the user to run, I want them to log in, go to this page, click on this thing, examine the, add to shopping cart, blah, 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 blah. And then I want them to say, nope, don't place the order, just drop off. And I want another user to come in, just browse, do nothing. And I want 80% of my users just browsing. I want 15% getting all the way there, but not pulling the trigger. And I want 5% to actually follow through and place the order. And then when you scale up the number of users, it uses those percentages based on those scenarios to determine the actual load on your site.
But those are not Gherkin style tests, though, right?
They're not written in Gherkin, but
Yeah.
they are step based, and they are
So the tool that
Behaviors.
their behaviors,
Scripted
exactly.
behaviors.
yeah. So the tool that Scott's talking about is the web performance and load test project in Visual Studio. I would show this to you for real, except I realized that I need Visual Studio Enterprise Edition, which I don't have installed right now. So I'll give you instead this Julia Child version. As we pull it out of the oven. So it basically is a project type in Visual Studio. And you walk through creating this whole new load test project type. And like you said, there's a recorder. This is some old documentation, slightly old documentation, but you go through and record actions. So it's more like coded UI. This part's like coded UI.
Yeah. But you can also tell it to run methods, right? So you don't actually, if you already have scenarios, like if you already have Gherkin,
you can make it do it.
Then basically you can create a method that calls what the steps call underneath the covers. You know what I mean? And that can be your scenario, and then you can just run that method.
Hey, Jim, you want to click down the air there? It's going to get really hot. You just press it down a bit. Yeah. So, and then like Scott said, there's some performance. Here we go. Yeah. The step load, how many users, and then how to increase. So you want to do like the stair step load pattern, or the gradual increase pattern, or, bursting capacity and that sort of thing.
And here's the mix, right? Number 4. Yeah. Into it.
Yeah. And then you can mix, and you can add, and there's kind of available tests.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what I was talking about, where you select which shopping cart, so
which test, step.
Well, no, this would be like your scenario. Mm-hmm. So I want 80% to go all the way through and actually place the order, or whatever, 5% to go all the way through and place the order. I want 10% to chicken out. I want 10% to do comparison shopping, and I want the rest just browsing.
Yeah, so he's got 100% mix in shopping cart, and then you run the load test, and then it gives you some perfmon, basically counters about various things you can capture.
What gets really interesting and what's hard is when you have a distributed system and you're trying to correlate the performance counters on the various pieces to try and make try and draw a picture of what the load is as the users go through the site. That gets tricky.
Yeah. So this is the Visual Studio tooling. I don't know what the comparable non-Visual Studio tooling is, like for JMeter for Java, but for the Node world or JavaScript world.
Well, JMeter just goes through the front end. So for JavaScript, Node or Python or
JMeter.
Ruby or whatever, you're just going through the front end.
Yeah, and so
in fact, you can use this for that.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
If you have Visual Studio and you have TFS, then it doesn't matter what your server is. This is just web.
And then, so Richard Campbell, the co-host of .NET Rocks, has done talks on this for many years. This is the first one I found. This screenshot is terribly blurry, but this is from, I don't know, Tech Ed or something. Yeah, this is in 2010. He's done this talk here in San Diego before. I've seen it at the .NET User Group many years ago. So you can easily search Richard Campbell web load testing, and you'll see his talk. He's done it, like I said, for many years. And but he does a great walkthrough of this. It's very clear and easy to understand. And he brings 2 boxes with him, and he does it in person. He shows you what the what it looks like when you have a performance problem and what the patterns look like and what things to look for. And so
Watching out for overload on your clients.
Yeah.
Because you can have an inability to measure properly because your clients, which are running the tests, have become overloaded. And therefore you're not
Right.
really executing.
Yeah.
right. Basically excluding the noise from the actual test runner itself. And
Yeah, that's and one of the things that the load tester will do is actually show your client performance counters along with your service performance counters.
Yeah.
And you're right, if those things get above 80 for X amount of time, then you're probably not getting everything you can out of that client. Yeah.
Right.
Good call.
So but even still, I think this is rare to see people have a really refined approach to this. It's pretty complicated. I think they mentioned in here that good capacity testing is part art, part science. And like Scott said, when you're dealing with a distributed system, how to make sense of what you're looking at from the results and make a meaningful change to impact that. It's really takes a lot of time and a lot of practice really, and seeing those patterns over and over again, and then spotting those and go, oh, that looks like a memory leak, and this one, that's really pretty tricky.
I mean, the only reason that we did this particular capacity testing or load testing, I guess, is because they had bought a company they had, let's say, 600,000 users, and they had bought a company with 600,000 users, and they were doing the merge operation, right? So now they were like, oh crap,
1.2 million.
Yeah, 1.2 million. That's a big number. What if they all kind of hit it at the same time? Is our system just going to go?
Yeah.
So that's why they invested, in trying to figure out what the capacity actually was for the
Zero
system
question.
they had set up.
Yeah.
What do you say? How often do you suggest we do capacity testing?
Well, again, so in this case that I'm talking about, we were trying to determine if there was going to be a problem. If you have, most people, they have a small, steadily growing, server base, user base, and it's not until you can anticipate a problem that you should even bother, right? The reason why we did it was because we did anticipate a problem, because we now had 1.2 million, and that was a lot of users, and we could easily see the system falling over. But for most, people starting out with sort of smaller businesses and that sort, a single web server can handle a lot of users. I mean, a ton of users. So I would say the first step is just measure, and then once you see a trend in your measuring that indicates there might be a problem, then you can invest some time into this, right?
Yeah. So he's
Any major new release.
any major new release.
So he says in the book here to say a couple of things about that, about like how valuable is capacity testing, when should you do it. One thing he mentions is the trends can be an important to the decision. Can be as important to decision making as absolute values, and so they try to include the resulting graphs, these sorts of things that you get out of capacity testing. They try to include those in their deployment pipeline dashboard. That would imply that they're being run as part of an automated deployment. So later in the book, in 238, he talks about automating capacity testing, and he makes an argument to say that capacity tests should test specific real-world scenarios, have predefined thresholds for success, be of a short duration so they can finish in a reasonable amount of time, be robust in the face of change. One thing he mentioned is that they tend to be even more brittle than automated tests, especially when you don't have fuzzy thresholds. They tend to fail, even though you didn't, you're okay with the capacity reduction, and be repeatable. And so he's basically arguing that they should be automated. When you check in, you should run capacity tests as part of your testing strategy. I agree with Scott. You shouldn't start out by just writing capacity tests. I think there is, in some cases, there's some interest to know, like academically, to know what the capacity of your system is. If you're curious, write a capacity test. And even if you don't tell anyone, just go, well, I know the system's going to fall over at 1.2 million users. That's kind of interesting to know about, but it's going to take probably a while to get that test set up and to get it to run repeatedly, and even longer to get it integrated into your deployment pipeline. So you really have to say, like, we're about to merge twice, half as many users as we already have,
Or like,
double
Hunter.
our user size.
Hunter's a great
case of where capacity, even out of the gate, was important.
I don't know.
Because
I
the
don't know.
sheer number of potential users and devices.
But see, I don't know. I would
was-
disagree with that. I think that's a perfect case for measure first before you have a problem. Because yes, you think you have an understanding of how many users may ultimately use the system, but the thing we don't know, I don't think we have a clear picture of, is what the usage pattern actually looked like. The reality is that the usage of that system is not that impactful. The amount of data going over the wire and the amount of data being processed by the users and the number of requests is really low. So the amount of users you can support is probably much higher than you think it is.
That's the whole purpose of the capacity testing, is to just find out what that number,
Yeah, but I don't think it's day one. It's not day one. It's like
it's not day
beta
one.
release before major release, probably. That would
Yeah.
like that probably is where it's
Yeah,
at.
no,
Just as importantly, I mean, one of the reasons he says it's not about the implicit numbers is you can have a test environment and you may say, well, my test environment only supports 50 users.
Right.
And that's fine. And then as you prepare for release, if all of a sudden that test environment only supports 25 users anymore, you go, oh, we may have a little bit of a capacity problem
Yes.
here. Even though your production system may support thousands of users, you can quickly identify
Yeah.
with a relatively isolated test, hey, we've got major performance problems that are creeping into this. We're seeing
Right.
a 50% hit on performance.
Yeah, and he said,
That's
yeah,
really what you're looking
that's what he says when setting predefined thresholds. He said, don't set hard numbers. Don't say I must support this many. You have to ramp the tests up to whatever it is and then tune it. And so you go, okay, well, I only have to support 100,000 users and I can support 1 million right now. That's cool, but don't let the test run until it's only 100,000. I want to know if we went from 1 million to 500,000 because we just cut capacity in half. And so then somebody needs to make a choice. Is that acceptable? So you just need to ramp it up to the one user less than it fails on and then
Right.
turn it down until you're at an acceptable level, right?
But I like that usage because it's a good canary, right? Because like if
Mhm.
it happened right then, you're like, what did we just change? Like it's gonna help you identify.
Right.
The thing that you just did.
Cut capacity in half. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
measure is the real.
measure is the thing. And the question was kind of when should we start measuring? How often? I don't know. I mean, I'm not. I'm not a fan of go out of the gate and start measuring because you don't know what you're measuring yet.
I'm going to go similarly. The first time I started measuring was actually when we had a problem. I mean, our site
Right.
started slowing to a crawl in the middle of the day and we couldn't take orders. We couldn't figure out why.
Yeah.
So I started using logs and
Yeah.
I used WCAT.
Yeah, that was the other one I was going to pull up here.
Mostly it was free, but it was a royal pain to set up. But once you got a bunch of scenarios going, I was at least able to start taking baselines, push until I found the squeeze point, and then using those baselines, now I know, okay, when have I fixed it? Well, when that baseline, when that number that I can handle goes up and I no longer have problems making sales.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it was some stupid side process of browsers that happened to be hitting this really, really, really terribly written query
Right.
that was taking out our store.
Right.
People
Right.
couldn't buy things because
Someone was running
in this case,
reports
a
or
web
something.
crawler
Yeah.
was running
Yeah.
some really nasty SQL. So being able to isolate down what those are, and then like you say, once you get that scenario set up, it's not that painful to rerun it.
Yeah.
And look at, okay, with respect to what I had a month ago or before the last release, how am I doing now? It doesn't matter that it's so far out of range from the users you think you'll get. It matters.
The
Did I
trend.
make it a whole
The
bunch
trend
worse?
matters.
Did I
Yeah.
make it a whole bunch better?
Yeah. The trend matters for sure. So WCAT, like Andy mentions, WCAT's a web capacity analysis tool. I've only used this like once or twice. It's been a really long time. I was going to show you a demo, but it's a pain to set up, like you reminded me of. It basically just, as I remember, it just plays back it records and then plays back HTTP requests that you can crank up, right?
You can load in your
Logs.
your IIS logs.
Yeah.
So you can create WCAT scenarios out of your IIS logs.
And you can just say play back all of these gets, basically. Like
Right.
pound my server with realistic traffic. This is the actual traffic that came off production.
Right. Doesn't do so well with things like real scenarios where you're going
Yeah.
through, putting something in my cart, adding this, adding that, and you're entering addresses, checking out. It doesn't do that as well. But if you're just looking at, our site gets tons and tons of load just of people browsing.
Right.
And then there's the interaction thing. So if you wanted to put a baseline load,
Yeah.
this thing, if you know a whole bunch of user scenarios that you have of browser types, you can put a pretty reasonable load on that kind of scenario and then go test. What happens when I try and place an order?
Right. So there's a call out on 236 that he mentions what we were just talking about, the shortcomings of the scaling factors, and or is this not the one I'm thinking of? There's one where he mentions the thing about you need to watch trends. Oh, the call out on 233, setting the initial capacity thresholds. You know, you could say it needs 100,000 documents and you're way above that, but you cut it in half and you won't know. The test won't fail until you have a problem, and you want it to fail earlier than that. So, yeah, I mean, I think his advice is don't overthink it from the beginning. Don't over-engineer for capacity. Don't just simple code that works. And, you know, developers are very bad at judging what the problem is. So wait till you have a problem.
I mean, you suggested integrating it together with the test that you run, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I feel that's over-engineering it.
Well, if you had, so like in Andy's case, if you had a performance issue, a capacity issue that directly impacted sales, like it doesn't even matter, whatever. If you had a capacity issue and you were able to write a test that proved the capacity issue is gone and that test is repeatable, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't just integrate that into your automated test suite. Now, you may break it into 2 separate phases, and you may say we have the commit phase test, and he says optionally as part of the commit phase test, which are the fast ones. You may say, no, the commit tests are super fast unit tests, and then I have my scenario-based tests, and then I have my capacity tests, and maybe the capacity tests only run when you merge to the release branch, or what you know, like Bill said, when it's a major release is coming up. But I would definitely say once you've written a test, you should keep it around and have it running until you've decided it's irrelevant, which it probably is never irrelevant.
Of all of their testing scenarios that they've mentioned in the book, I think these are among the slowest, right? So it's going to be your slowest feature.
Yeah, it'll be like nightly or something like that.
Yeah, I thought so too, and I thought that was why it was weird when he said on 238 he kind of defined what a capacity test should be, and some of these had strong echoes to what Michael Feather says a unit test should be, and it's like they should be short. They should be like, they should run quickly, but it says a reasonable length of time, and I underline it and put a question mark, and I said, what is, are we talking like 5 minutes? Because, you know, to run capacity, you got to load the system up. So inherently, even if the test itself is fast, you got to wait, you know, you got to actually get users on, and you may need a pattern where it takes 5 minutes. Yeah. But you could run tests that are representative. So Bill said you only handle 50 users, but now you can only handle 25. That's enough to tell you you've got a problem, and you can probably run that test faster than saying 50,000 users loaded up. So
sometimes it's good to do your capacity testing on a slightly underpowered machine, because it's much easier to see the impact of changes.
Right. He did mention a little bit about that. He has a thing about what the environment should look like. Yeah, the tester of iPods. That was my favorite part. And he said they were complaining. Where is that page? It's on. So he starts on 234 about capacity testing. Oh yeah, on 235, and he talks about they were working on this project and they spent a bunch of time capacity testing this environment, and they had really poor results, and they were trying to save money, and they gave an underpowered environment, and they finally did some baselines, and they realized that a cluster of iPods could outperform the test environment they had. So they proved the guy, like, this cluster of iPods is more performant than the test environment you gave us. You need to give us better hardware. So
Well, it should have said you've already got the iPods. So.
just use that.
Just use those.
Yeah.
And in terms of reusing the scenario, I mean, do I start off writing scenarios in order to do capacity testing? No. But do I take scenarios that already exist and use those to do my capacity testing, when in order to do capacity testing, I should be going through the front door to create the real load? Well, then, yeah, it's a no-brainer, right? Like, I've already got them. I would have to write them otherwise. Why not reuse them, right? So I don't know that you're writing them specifically for the purpose of capacity testing, but you can leverage those.
We're using something like, you know, the specs or this sort of scenario is
not the specs.
Well,
I'm thinking like one level underneath the specs, you know, the stuff that drives the automation of your site.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just saying, because one of the biggest issues that you run into, and you start getting into if you start really looking at this, is the introduction of lag is actually really, really important to this. You don't want to just hit everything as fast as you possibly can, because that's not what users do.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You need to kind of get a realistic ballpark of people hit something, and then it takes them a couple of seconds to load it up, and maybe another second or two to ingest it, and then do something, right?
Yeah.
They don't hit as fast as your automated
Yeah,
tests.
And
your
that's what
automated
the-
tests are going to be flying through it. That's absolutely true.
And that's what the web application Visual Studio testing lets you do some delays and stuff. And that the one thing I remember from Richard's talk, he says the delays are very important because in a really fast scenario, even when you do load, the users are not on the same pages when it's going that fast, but that's not realistic. If they're sitting on a page, now other users start overlapping them, and now the load profile is totally different because now you've got 6 people leaving this page, going to the next page at the exact same time, when before it was in succession. And so it says that like realistic user pauses are really important to getting an accurate profile. It did say overwhelmingly that it's like, this is really hard to do. It's very hard to get accurate testing, and you need to be careful about it. He did, but
It's like the feedback loop. Sorry, you have the faster feedback loops, and then you have the cost of going to the even slower feedback loops, but get more the areas in which you can fail. So you like start doing unit tests, well, you can fail on behaviors, right? And then you start doing behavior tests, but then you can fail on capacity and security. And then you start doing capacity tests and then security tests.
Yeah.
And then you're talking about maybe like distributed capacity and
Yeah.
things along those lines. Like,
Scalability.
so, scalability.
Yeah.
And hitting it
gets
from
harder
multiple
and-
regions and things like that.
harder and harder and harder.
Yeah.
But that's the thing where
When
like
Chaos Monkey doesn't do it, you invent Chaos Gorilla.
Yeah, exactly.
smashes entire
Data
sections
center.
of the
Yeah.
country. Yeah. Oh, that is cool actually. If you haven't seen such a thing, we should bring that up. Chaos
Simulated
Monkey.
load on this planet, and this planet gets destroyed every time.
And they do have Chaos Gorilla, right? You weren't just making that up.
yeah. You didn't
So
spell
this,
it right,
I didn't
but-
spell it right, but whatever. So Netflix has this project. It's called Simian Army. They call it Chaos Monkey. They have this is the blog post about it, I think. They have a long thing discussing what that is. And basically, they have a bunch of monkeys, Conformity Monkey, Dr. Monkey.
Chaos Gorilla's
Yeah.
right there.
And so it's like Chaos Monkey is just, let's run this in production on our production servers and cause absolute havoc and see if our apps can survive. And Chaos Gorilla is like Chaos Monkey, but it simulates an outage of an entire Amazon availability zone. So it just comes in and smashes servers in production. And so like the edict from Netflix was like, well, it better work. We're just going to turn this on and run it, set it loose on your code, and you better be able to sustain that. So, so they open sourced the project. I've never actually used it, but they
I
have.
probably don't even use it at Netflix.
They don't.
They
Even,
just
No.
open sourced it to hold everyone
No,
else
they
back.
do. No, they do. Actually,
I know.
Yeah, they do use it.
I'm not sure if they do anymore, actually. So I read a thing recently in the last couple of months that I think they've migrated to a newer thing. Like they've got some newer tool, but they definitely did use it before. It just causes chaos. So it's an interesting technique. I think that paired with this, again, we didn't read 10, so you won't know what I'm talking about, but the canary release strategy would be really interesting. You'd be able to slowly release the new version into one server node out of a whole farm and then run Chaos Monkey and track patterns and say, oh, Chaos Monkey is really impacting this one server. He's just smashing it and it can't handle it. So I think that's pretty cool.
So would the Chaos Monkey be what they were talking about at the top of 239 scenarios that represent realistic or pathological real life loading situation?
239.
Third line.
Third line. Our goal twofold: creating realistic production like load and choosing and implementing scenarios that are pathological real life. No, this is Chaos Monkey is not representing real life traffic. Chaos Monkey is representing like real life nefarious
Outages.
utter
No, it's
outage.
outages.
Hard drive failures, shutting down servers, like
Yeah.
databases unavailable, those sorts of things, like causing
Talk
chaos.
about how they respond to Chaos Monkey at all? Has anybody read anything on like what they do to?
well, they put everybody on call.
Yeah.
They're treated as real In the issues.
one,
It says
Yeah.
like you never run it on weekends. You don't run it
Yeah.
after hours.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's during the week. Yeah.
Is-
And it's business hours only, and there are people standing by as it's running in case.
It
Chaos
says
Monkey's successful.
by running Chaos Monkey in the middle of a business day in a carefully monitored environment with engineers standing by to address any problems, we still learn the lessons about the weakness in our system and build automatic recovery mechanisms to deal with them.
Yeah. So like that.
So
automatic
next time
recovery
an instance fails at 3 a.m. on Sunday, we won't even notice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they don't,
Yeah, like
they're
I
not
have actually rebooted my router while playing Netflix, and it just played, and then the router came back up, and there was never any interruption.
Yeah.
So I mean, even down to the client side, they're buffering enough, they've got, you know. and
But the other part too, if you look at the Kiosk Gorilla, they could lose the whole Amazon
Availability zone.
and
Yeah.
still keep it.
Yeah.
So when that meteor comes, you know,
Yeah.
I
Somebody
agree.
bombs Virginia.
That's the denial of service causes Amazon to drop that.
POS.
It is kind of interesting to say, like, you know, so much of the world appears to run on Amazon now, and the default is just North Virginia. Like, they don't round robin the default. It's just Northern Virginia. If someone just attacked Northern Virginia, so much of the internet would be out. It seems like quite a soft target, you know? Like it's, you should at least round robin what the default is. Like, for the people who are blindly just click a button, we shouldn't all just go to
if you
Virginia.
look at their like releases and things like that, as they get new stuff, it always ends up there first, and
Right.
it doesn't even like it's not even available in other
Yeah.
zones until
That seems like a massive failure point. Like,
All right.
I shouldn't
I'm
say
on,
that
dude.
because now the NSA is going to be tracking us because we're going to attack. Great. They make a mention on
There are
242.
only 2 viewers, and one was me and the other was probably the NSA.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm coming for Virginia.
his name's NSA bot.
They don't show up.
It's in his name.
There's 3 listeners.
Yeah. His name is Snowden Killer. You won't see him. They do mention something that I thought was, a little bit strange on capacity testing, but about using recorded interaction templates. This is just something that I think we use in unit tests and is useful anyways. It's the idea of like the acceptance test output has data that changes, but schema and structure that doesn't, or some data points that are locked that you care about and the other ones you don't. And so it's this idea of like just scrubbing the areas of the data you don't care that changes or you expect to change so that your tests aren't so brittle and they don't fail. So I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, and I think that's about it for capacity testing. There was one mention on 248 in the summary that I liked, and it said designing systems to meet non-functional requirements is complex. The cross-cutting nature of NFRs mean it's hard to manage these risks, and hard to manage the risks that they pose to any given project. This in turn can lead to 2 paralyzing behaviors: not paying enough attention to them from the start of the project, like I advocate, don't pay attention to them. At the other extreme, defensive architecture and over-engineering. So he doesn't really give an answer. He just says you've got 2 extremes. You either think about it at the beginning and you're paralyzed, and you're over-engineering, or you don't think about it at the beginning and you don't react until you have a problem and you're a startup and you just lost all your sales on day 1. And so a lot of startups would say, I would love it if on day 1 my servers crash. That means so many people want my product that it was successful. I tend to agree with that. But it also depends on where you're coming from. If you're trying to release a brand new product and you're going all stealth mode and you just go day 1, turn the servers on, and you get the Reddit hug of death and it crashes, I'm probably okay with that because you got enough interest. But if you're running a critical system that's running machines that can't afford to crash, there's some balance there you have to come up with. So.
Yeah. That's another good thing too, right? Like say, then like I can only handle 5,000 users and then start sending the rest of them to a waiting list, right?
Yeah, for the startup thing, for sure. Yeah, and I think for me, I'm okay with the site is crashing on day 1 of the new release. I'm okay with that because I'm not at all confident that any of my developers would be able to gauge what the performance risk is until they see it. And so even if we spent all this time, it's like you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and it goes out on day 1 anyways because no one thought about that SQL query that everyone was running. Well, that was a giant waste of 100,000, because, okay, we solved all these problems we don't have, and we didn't solve the one problem we do have. So I'm more of a fan of, don't really care about it until you have a problem. And for most people, you don't ever have a problem. Like web servers are incredibly efficient. They can handle a lot of users, unless you do something really dumb. And it's usually not the web server. It's almost always the database. It's almost always a query. Web servers are like, whatever, request response. And somebody says, select star from orders. It's like, crap. And then you're dead. Right? So
we don't need any join. Doing a select star.
Yeah. But it's your bottleneck.
Database interaction is what Brad meant.
Yeah, database. Yeah. The database will happily return all 100 million records you just asked for. You just got to give it a second, and then it'll load up the RAM in the web server, and then cascading it will all fall over.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter that you made the response time of all your pages sub 2 seconds because someone was allowed to actually cause the query. It's going to take forever. So that, in my experience, that works better. Just wait till you have a problem.
But measuring is good.
Unit tests and automated acceptance tests.
Yep.
That out front.
Yeah, you're better at writing simple code that you can guarantee performs the action that it's supposed to perform. Yeah, you have some repeatable way to say, yep, it satisfies all the customer requirements. And
Oh, yeah. In our particular scenario, the query ran fine if you ran it in an automated acceptance test. If you were to put it in there, it would run fine. It didn't have a problem until 50 people
ran it at the same time.
ran that same search basically at the same time.
And
now
and
all of a sudden we've got this concurrency problem where they get stuck behind each other, and then they start taking longer, and then you get more people backed up, and then
it's one of those, if it really, like in that scenario, if it really was a bot that you didn't care about, the fix is block the bot, and then you've bought yourself some time, and that's way cheaper than just block the bot.
Exactly what we did.
Yeah, block the bot, and then you buy yourself some time, and the site's still up, everybody's happy, it released on time, and you have some breathing room to solve the problem, rather than you're 6 weeks late because you're still optimizing the damn query.
Yeah, you don't want to be sitting there trying to find out if that would happen.
Right.
Yeah. Guessing.
Yeah.
Don't guess.
Don't guess. Measure. Okay.
The only one, and I mean, I know we talk about automated acceptance testings, and that peer review is a little bit less of an issue because realistically, you should have tests that do all of this stuff. But one of the things that we do have in a peer review checklist at ours is it's asking the question: what's the likelihood that this thing will ever get 1 million rows or 1 million records? And if it's low, non-existent, don't worry about it. What's the likelihood that it's ever going to get 1 million people at once?
Right.
These are the points where you start asking that question. Be honest. What's the likelihood that particular function, if it isn't, let the problem happen and then go deal with it.
Yeah, it's like a cost benefit analysis, right? Like, how much is it going to cost me to handle 1 million users, and how likely is it that I'm going to get 1 million users, and do I care about solving that problem right now? And for most people, it's probably no, you don't. Right. There may be 1 or 2 places in your system where it is you want to solve it, but it's not like across the board that you want to do that. So, yeah.
Okay, so the next chapter was chapter 10. We did not require reading that, but I just would like to highlight the sections that Brad was talking about earlier, starting on 261 and going through the middle of 265. Those I found were very interesting.
Canary releasing.
The blue-green deployments and canary releasing, both of those were very interesting.
Did you talk about blue-green earlier?
I think he did, yeah. I mean, and he's referenced this section, I know, in managing data, he referenced both of those things again. Yeah.
But so what about the security? He didn't touch on really security testing, right?
He hasn't yet.
I think it's
I'm only on 13.
I'm at the beginning of the non-functional requirements. He started talking about security testing, and then abandoned it.
Yeah, he didn't really talk about it.
So like one thing that I wanted to try doing, or something like I'm curious where people have done this in the past, is like hooking up like a tool like Hydra to attempt SQL injection on your try Hydra SQL injection.
I guess I shouldn't just search Hydra. I'll get the actual.
Yeah.
Pen test and hack Microsoft SQL.
Yeah, pen testing.
Yeah.
And so are there any pen testing suites, or is there any tools that people use to basically perform like an automated security audit on your system before it goes out?
I mean, I've hacked your servers. I'm just not going to tell you what tools I use. So
we want to just keep you out, really. Is what we're trying.
There's plenty of external companies and programs that'll do it. At my last company, we were big enough to where the company actually had one because there's enough applications that internally the test environment got hit like nightly. My current place, we security scan production daily. So
security scan with like with Hydra or some sort of tool set, or like
I shouldn't say that word. It's not trying to do destructive.
Right. It's just
the one that
poking
we had
around.
In the previous place, the test environment was destructive.
Brute forcing passwords with encracked Hydra and Medusa. There's
So I've done some the one that I have done is use this library, man in the middle attack, and the only reason, MITMA proxy. I was working on a project that was like an IoT type project. It was a hardware device that was a secure social network hardware device thing, and it was all SSH protocol and stuff. And part of it was, can we can we hack this thing? And we had to basically do a man-in-the-middle attack to take traffic in from the client, rewrite it, and send it through, or muck with it and send it through. So I was able to successfully use this MITMA proxy thing to do HTTPS and SSH hacking, which is pretty cool. But it wasn't in any automated fashion. It was just kind of poking around with this tool and using it.
Did you find holes?
Yeah. There was definitely some things in the protocol, like in the structure of the messages we were sending over the SSH tunnel needed to be fixed, because there was ways that you could spoof them that we couldn't tell. Like you would able to rewrite the message payload, and then since you're man in the middle in both sides, you got a response back that was readable, and so we basically had to encrypt the message more securely. So, but there wasn't much, but it was more like, it was mostly an exercise in how the heck do I even hack SSH, and so that was MITMA stuff. But I haven't used the other stuff. I haven't used Hydra or Ncrack or anything.
Hydra I learned about from the Troy Hunt.
No, this is good.
Yeah. So Troy Hunt, the How to Hack Yourself First video.
Oh, this is his. I don't know if I want to go there. I'm not that good. I don't know if I want to go to a thing called foofus.net either. Oh, this looks like a hacker website. This is definitely a hacker website. Oof. There's a lot of fixed width font on here. I'm gonna get out. Yeah, so if anybody who does this with their email address, that's a hacker. Come on, gmk@foofus.net, like trying to be as, don't scrape my email address. No, that'd be interesting. He didn't really talk about it. I mean, the SQL injection thing I think is pretty easy to do in a scenario-based test, and I have done that a few times. Like, we have a client that had a SQL injection issue, and I said, we need to fix this, and so I wrote a test to prove it. And so it was a scenario test on dev that just, as the user went in the front and just typed in SQL injection in a text box and submitted the form, and then verified that it was totally horked, and it was, and then fixed the problem, and then ran the test again, and then the test didn't succeed. So that I think is doable through front end, and you could even do that on API level stuff. If you just are automated the testing to the API, you can send garbage. And I think I do often, I wouldn't call it hacking, but I do often I'll write the happy path test first, and then the edge case tests, and then the completely impossible test, right? So it would be like the null range or the zero range, and then the happy path, and then the like, what if you just throw junk at it? And that's more academic for me to see what would happen, but that's kind of like penetration testing, I guess.
Yeah, you have to assume your client isn't the front end.
Yeah.
So you have to have tests that are passing.
Yeah.
True hack.
Yeah. It would be interesting to, like you said, to run it like you guys do in production. I mean, that's all that really.
Application scanning, things like that. We don't have the flag turned on to try and do
right.
So like
destructive stuff.
Hydra actually does like you have the option of doing like non-destructive SQL injection and just saying,
select
the schema of the, well, actually it's like a button to get me the schema of the internal database, and just do SQL injection to read out the insights of the database to you. And so then you can write your own queries against the database through the site. It's pretty
is that, since I can't get to this crazy website, is that tool free?
Yeah, so if you go to YouTube, there's like a 5-year-old teaching you how to use it.
A 5-year-old?
Yeah, so
Hydra Postgres?
That's try just like Hydra, Troy
5-year-old,
or something like that.
Was
So it's Troy Hunt's kid.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Was it right by the 5-year-old?
No.
Troy Hunt. I played pool with this guy in
Troy Hunt.
Redmond
Let's
once.
keep it easy there, Brad.
I did. He's a very good pool player.
Toy Hunt. I don't think we want to go down that
Sorry.
route.
WordPress brute hacking. I don't know if I want to type 5-year-old kids, but
Hacking your child's play SQL injection. That's probably it.
Hacking your child's play, yeah.
That YouTube video, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 3-year-old. Sorry, I was too old.
Yeah.
So he's just sitting there telling him how to hit.
I wonder what this looks like on Hangouts right now. Sorry, one other viewer.
Want to hack a website?
Want to hack a
Just
website?
hack it a little bit. Okay. Can you grab the mouse? And how old are you now, Ari?
3.
You're 3, so you're ready. You could do this, couldn't you? Okay, so let's go forward again. Now, what we want to do is we're going to hack this website just here. Now, can you click on one of these links? So let's click. You want to click on that one? Oh, you click the back button. You've got little hands.
You've got little
That's not a
hands.
problem for a 3-year-old. Maybe your hands are a little bit too little. So you put your hand on top of the mouse. That's a boy. Now we go forward, which is that button just there. Okay. Now, which one of these should we hack? What if we hack that one? Yeah? So press the button. Press the button on that one. Okay. Now, the way we're going to hack this website
This is incredibly long.
Let's look at this URL up here.
Like, yeah, get to the tool, because the tool right there.
Stretch that across the
Right there.
Should we find the column? If you go to the mouse. So I think this looks like the ASP.NET membership provider, doesn't it? Okay, so grab the mouse. So let's get membership.
That's funny.
Email addresses and usernames and passwords.
That's funny.
So that's the tool. It just goes in and it starts pulling out the guts, and then you can basically do whatever the hell you want.
G.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that must be his kid's name. All right, cool. So what Scott was mentioning, Martin Fowler has 2 articles, Canary Release and Blue-Green Deployment, which are the 2 topics they touch on here in chapter 10. So
Blue-green, we discussed both of these at the ArchSig last time. Yeah. But Blue-green is the one that I was recommending for the specific server that you were
it's a
dealing
beast.
with.
Yeah, it's the beastly server.
Beastly server, yeah.
It's kicking and screaming its way to Azure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so then moving on to managing data. I think I just wanted to do a couple of demos here.
Are you in the Hangout? You'll probably want to get in the Hangout and then share your screen.
Okay.
So you can.
I was in the Hangout, but then I left because Jim was picking on me.
Aww.
Oh,
That's why no one joins the YouTube. Every time I ask you to watch comments, you probably just pick on everybody.
Okay.
No online bullying, Jim. We're going to have to have an intervention.
Can you send me the link?
Can I send you the link?
Yeah,
That is a harder question than you'd imagine it to be.
Yeah.
How would you like
Hip chat's fine. You're on.
Oh,
I see you.
God, no, I'm not. I'm on my phone. Oh, that's not HipChat. That's SourceTree. Look at all those green builds. Did you catch that real fast? Boom. All right, we'll just close that quickly. So you don't. Nothing like. Of course not. That's why the builds are green. It actually works. No, that was HipChat. That was HipChat hooked into Team City. So when Team City finishes, it sends a message to our.
Oh boy.
Oh no.
Hang
on.
I got it.
Okay. Good.
And now I need to. And it's still getting a little bit of echo.
Oh, I can't mute your speakers.
Oh.
This is fun. I don't think I have to give you permission.
Just do it this way. Hello, hello, hello.
I don't know which one you are. Is this you? Still good.
Share your screen.
Hold on. We're trying to mute, man. I need power as well. No, it was already done.
Okay, you're good. You need my power cable?
Yeah.
That's terrible. Streaming's gonna die now, probably. Share your screen.
Let's see if it crashes. Nope. Good.
Awesome.
Okay. So we'll start this one. So let me just say.
Does the studio just de-minimize your Chrome?
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. It's coming.
Oh, we should probably
We
just
need to like make that a real thing.
probably just
Feature right there.
do this. Hello, hello. Okay. Woo!
Okay.
We will get this right at some point.
It always takes it's just every single time. Okay, so there's a couple of approaches when you're dealing with managing data and deploying applications. And I think he mentions, he mentions basically the first step is versioning your database and adding the ability to incrementally change the schema over time. And that's easiest when you have a one-on-one relationship between an application and the database. And it's just a single application per database schema. It gets harder when you have multiple applications talking to a single database, because now when you make a database change, you have to make sure that all of the applications can support it. And so he mentioned some stuff around going back to that blue-green deployment. He talks about updating the applications to be able to support multiple schema versions prior to upgrading the database to change to the new schema. So that's how you'd have to manage that.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
In production, we've generally done the opposite, where the database could support 2 versions of the app.
Interesting.
Because database deployments database changes always get deployed first. And this is like blue-green, where only the app is blue-green, same database server.
Mm-hmm.
And then the database changes are back compat to the current version. And then the new version is also compatible.
Talking about triggers.
So you always go
triggers.
version -1, but you're rolling forward. So you support current version and previous version, and then you
current version and next app version.
Next app version.
And so what happens is you don't do any destructive database changes until all of that's happy. So if, like when he lays out that you have to, if you're dropping data, et cetera, in this scenario, you wouldn't even do that until the very next release.
Right, and that's the same if you're going app before database or database before app. You only remove the old version once you're happy with the new one, right? That does make sense. I'm still not getting how you speak multiple versions from the database side, though.
So let's say you added a column. There's a procedure that has to handle it as a parameter.
Procedures. Okay, that answered my question.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So this only happens in the same world where people use store procedures.
Got it. Okay.
Instead of tightly coupling your app to your table structure.
All right. Yeah. So that's store procedures is a great way of like a layer of versioning if you have multiple apps talking to your database.
Right. There's some ugly tricks you got to play with the apps with the signature changes, but it's mitigatable.
Yeah. But that's very anti what EF would drive you towards, EF does not drive you toward. I mean, EF isn't really well suited for a database that's used by multiple apps. It's intended to be one database per app, and then the structure can be inherent in the app because it's one-to-one.
Yeah.
Right.
Even if it does, it's one-to-one. So
you can change every hour. It doesn't matter, but it's the fact that.
Yeah, so I think that's true. But
they absolutely exist.
Ike's opinion would be no. Yeah, the ideal world would say one database to one app for this reason. It's just a pain in the butt.
The microservices movement is all about that as well. The one-to-one.
Everybody taking data from everybody else.
Yeah, you would serve it over an API or whatever. Yeah.
If you go listen to Julie Lerman and her domain-driven designs, she'll go right down that.
Yeah.
Each one of those domains represents an
its
app
own data
which
store.
should have its own data store.
Yeah. The reality is, though, it's hard to do that, and
Absolutely.
they exist, and legacy projects exist, and single point of failure mega databases used by multiple apps exist. The worst part is a lot of times we'll go into a project and we'll get an app and its database and not know if there's anybody else that access the database, and then it's like, oh, okay, should we delete that? I don't know.
It's the spreadsheet warriors.
Yeah. You have no idea where the data is coming from. You don't know who else is using it. And that, I think the answer
there may or may not be reports that also hit this database.
Yeah, I think the answer there is you have to profile in production. You have to run a SQL profile in production for like a day or a week,
a
or
month
a month
sometimes.
to see who else, you know, who else hits it.
Hey, can you slowly just remove access from this?
And then call me when it breaks.
Roles, and then just call me if anybody calls you.
It's not exaggerating. One of the most effective measures of getting rid of stuff you don't need anymore with reporting is rename the underlying structures and see who yells.
Yeah.
Because if nobody yells, then obviously it wasn't needed.
Well, that's
Unfortunately,
true.
you gotta wait for 13 months.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly.
You have
the
to wait
point I
till
was
the
gonna
end of
make.
year
Yeah,
reports when the whole
End of year reports, like quarterly reports. There's all these like.
Four-year audit and seven-year
Yeah.
audit.
Yeah. Anyway, so if you're in the one-to-one app to database, and you're going through some sort of ORM, so this can be, well, in .NET it would be Entity Framework or in Hibernate. I'll show you both of those. And then if we're not talking about, God dang it, it closed all my other tabs too. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Okay, so if you're in JavaScript, my ORM of choice is Sequelize. I don't know who else plays in the JavaScript space, and if you have a different version that you like to, or different tool,
Sequelize is good for SQL data.
Yeah.
Mongoose for Mongo data.
Any opinion on the PHP one?
I don't have I try to avoid PHP.
I know of one, but it's terrible.
Yeah.
That's kind of the reoccurring thing with PHP. That's why we try to avoid it. Like,
yeah,
it's terrible.
Nobody writes middle layers with PHP.
Yeah. Anyway,
I hope
so
not. I hope not. I don't know. We avoid PHP. I don't know. I don't have an answer.
Every job I've ever been at, PHP has somehow creeped into anything that's like.
And then
It's
just
like, okay, we did
destroyed it.
everything possible to avoid PHP, and some random person's like, hey, I made this tool in PHP, and you're just, what the
It wasn't some word.
And then it becomes like the most critical tool that everyone wants to use. Because I just wrote it real quick in PHP. It's fine.
This finance guy that has just unlimited domain knowledge just put together this PHP app for us.
It's always those guys. It's always a guy that thinks they're a programmer. One of those viewers isn't PHP dude 65 or something. Sorry, buddy.
NSA PHP driven.
Yeah, the NSA is probably all written in PHP. The whole thing is
Now you've
PHP.
insulted the NSA and PHP developers.
It's probably like the NSA didn't actually mean to do what they did. They just wrote it in PHP and went, oh, crap, look what we did. Look what happened.
And so if you have an ORM in Python, you'll use SQL Alchemy most likely, and they also have a migration strategy very similar to the one I'm going to talk about.
Is this like that dbmigrate.net thing that they have in the book?
No, they talk about DB deploy. And I actually had an old blog post from 2014 about DB deploy and specifically dbdeploy.net because that's where I was. And I was trying to use it to hit Oracle. And yeah, it's issue. And it's got a lot of issues. There's two different versions. Each version does different things. So depending on what you're doing, you need to choose one or the other, but you have to go through this, like evaluate the products, you know. It's not, yeah, exactly.
In fact, maybe we can circle back later, but he's ignoring an entirely different way of managing database code in his book.
Yes.
Yeah, he is.
Yes,
And
he
I was
is.
kind of concerned about that.
Yeah. So you're talking about the, what tool are you recommending in particular? Yeah, the RedGate. Yeah.
So we intended to show RedGate. However, our RedGate expert is in Honduras.
His passport didn't even use.
There's 4 viewers though, so maybe he just logged on from Honduras.
Around anymore, or is he just in other countries?
He's just like James Bond.
He's
He
like
just
a
travels.
world traveler.
NSA, let's
Shh.
Weekend at Ike's.
Yeah, it is. It's Weekend at Ike's. He's been dead for a month. Just prop him up for sales meetings.
And if you're doing DB deploy or dbdeploy.net, you know, in Java or .NET, one of the issues that commonly you run into, in fact, they even talk about this in the book, is they talk about numbering scripts, right? So you're saying this is my change script 1, and this is my change script 2, and this is my change script 3. And the problem is if you deal with multiple branches at all, that is a really bad idea, that auto numbering scheme.
Does 2 come before 2, or does 2 come after 2?
2,
They're all
exactly.
numbered 2.
Yeah.
What's the other reason that using this methodology on a bigger team or bigger project is a pain? Because sometimes or if you have longer release cycles, if you have to hold work back all of a sudden you're having to take what was a canonical sequence and now trying to take individual changes in and out.
Well,
And
oh,
try
if you
to
have to
figure out
hold
where
work back.
I really like the database projects in Visual Studio database projects here. It's like the RedGate tool.
Right.
This
Yeah.
is you just download the schema and a set of scripts.
Yeah,
and then-
comparative and make it so, right?
Yeah.
is
Although if
basically-
migration scripts are the way you want to go, RedGate's ready roll.
Right.
Actually
That's what
does take a lot of the housekeeping.
that's what we were going to show was the
Yeah.
ready roll tool.
Yeah. So all of these migration strategies. Oh, well, just finish the thought. So don't use auto increment. Instead, use date timestamp. So instead of just saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is what my example. I'm just using date.time sort of formats for the scripts.
And in that scenario, what date time are you using? The one of the integrating or the pull into the main trunk branch prior to release, or
No, so this
date
is
time
the
of-
date and time that you created the script. So regardless of when it merges back into
Gotcha.
the develop, right?
And the
but
idea-
it does
It has to be
assume.
expressed as UTC, right?
Well, it could be as if you have a disjointed team, right, that spans multiple time zones. Absolutely, then it would need to be UTC. If everyone's co-located, then there's no problem there.
Pick
but-
a standard, and then the idea would be pick a date time format that is sequential. So when you're in a file system or Explorer and you want to open which ones do I run in order, they're sorted in order. Right?
Yeah,
That's the way.
but in order to make this situation work, you'll have to have a tool that's able to fill in the holes, right? So you may get into a situation where you, as a developer, were on one branch, then switch to another branch, and so when you try and run that branch, it will need to fill in the holes that come from the scripts that came from that other branch, right? So that talks about all that. Okay, so now let's just do a quick demo of migrations.
How's YouTube looking, Jim? Solid? 4 solid viewers?
All right.
Most of them are bots, but
Are they insulting us like that one time was spamming us? That was pretty good.
no, I can write some insults in that out.
Yeah, one came in and went out.
Okay, so I just created a person class, and I created a context that's like the list of all the tables or classes that you have. And then in order to set up migrations, I'm going to choose my data access, and I'm going to say enable migrations.
This is Entity Framework newest.
Yeah, I
newest.
guess it's like 6.
so hopefully it's not 7, because I heard that's 7.
That's not out.
Migrations isn't 100% ready yet.
Yeah, I don't think that's not production ready yet. Anyways, is it 7 still in like?
Oh, I thought it was released as
Is
part
it?
of the core.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was released.
The first parts of it went with core.
Yeah.
Oh, so like a month ago or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I forgot to do, and that's what's blowing up right now, is create an app config that actually points to a database. That's like an important thing that you have to do.
Oh, you need a connection string?
Yes, a connection string. That's brilliant.
Imagine that. Yes.
Oh, great
Yeah.
site, connectionstrings.net, where it tells you how to.
Yeah.
Is it net or com? We were just talking the other day. There are
Uh,
2 sites that I spend probably, if you looked at my Google history during working hours, more time than anything on. It's connectionstrings.com and the MSDN help page for datetime formats in C#. Because I never remember what letter is minute. Is it capital M or lower M? I never know.
Okay.
And I thought I should create datetimeformats.com and just plaster that shit with ads. I would make so much money because there's got to be a bunch of people like me that just go, what the hell is the seconds format in .NET? And I just get the best SEO and I just rake in the dough.
Okay.
That's the way to do it.
I'm sure MSDN has no SEO on that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
After hours, is it stringconnections.net?
We'll say TIG.
Yeah, I should write an app for showing your after hours traffic for sure. This would be vastly different than the working hours traffic, that's for sure. User ID's got
Nice.
some squirrely case there. Can't you just do trusted connection?
Yeah.
And make your life easier.
No,
Don't
well,
expose
I don't
your
know
user
that
ID
I don't
and
know that
password.
it'll make life easier, actually.
Use trust connection true, and then you're good.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to pipe in a username and password there for all of YouTube to hack.
Don't worry about that.
TIG demo database.
Yeah.
They're going to destroy that TIG demo.
Oops, I already have a TIG demo from last time. So this will be TIG demo migrations. And we'll say a user is a demo user.
And the password is?
The password is
Brad is
demo
awesome.
password 123.
How is that not your password?
All right. And so, oops, not that. And so now that we have a connection string, I think that should work a little bit better. Well, it enabled migrations, which basically just means creating this configuration class, which inherits from DB migration configuration. It doesn't actually do anything yet until you create the first migration. So let's go ahead and do that now.
Save your app config.
Okay. So I need to set that as the startup project, which I have way too many things here. Do we see it?
Middle, under manage NuGet.
There it is. Okay.
Cool.
Nice.
Hate when your
Not sure
pointer's
what that-
invalid.
Not sure what that means.
It means you updated to the latest version of Windows Anniversary Edition and
Yes.
crushed Visual Studio. Anybody else do that yet? Don't do it.
Yeah.
Destroyed Visual Studio.
I have the one that like replaces the login screen with your background from when you're logged out, or your logged out screen with your background from when you're logged in.
Is that what it does?
Yeah, I think so.
I just
Log out.
have this fancy Bing image still on mine, but it's
Yeah,
just
but it does overlay. It does overlay. Yeah. But the most important feature of the thing is what Brad showed last time, which is bash shell
new
and
command shell. Yeah.
and the new command shell stuff.
New
That's
command shell.
neat.
I think we
Okay.
experienced a lot of wonkiness.
It
So we
will
want
force you to
to-
reinstall Visual Studio though in my experience.
We want to add migration, and we're going to call this initial create.
That's on our list.
And,
This though, you're versioning the schema or you're versioning the database?
yes, I am versioning
I was
the
gonna ask what the
schema
difference
within
is.
the database.
So not the actual database itself.
What's the difference?
No, you can version the data within the database as well as, I mean, you can version everything inside the database, including the data. So
That's true.
Totally. Like,
But this is
that's-
versioning the schema.
Okay, but I think the book was actually talking about the actual database, right?
2012.
The actual database.
mean
So
the
it's
data.
talking about
Yeah, for your testing and so on. I think for.
yes,
not
yeah. Well,
Okay.
there's a part that talks about versioning schema and being able to publish those schema changes along with the application itself. So in other words, keeping the database up to
I
date.
think-
And then it was talking about also test data, right? So that's a different topic. We haven't gotten to that one
Right,
yet.
but I've actually heard of, I think it was, I first heard of in a Docker meetup where they were talking about, because in Docker, the question was, how can you test 100 databases? Like, how can you test against 100 databases? And their thing was, you can actually store versions of the database within the Docker container itself and test against all of those at the same time.
Why would you want to test against 100 databases at the same time?
Why would you not? Doesn't that sound awesome? 100 databases. I think what you mean is multiple versions of the database,
Right.
possibly. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah, sure. You could
But
have
are
a Docker container that runs a specific version of your database, which implies a schema and
Right.
a set of test
But the
data.
other thing too, when you test, you always have to do a refresh back. Sometimes you have to do a refresh back to of that data to that state, before you actually start testing again. So a lot of like things like RedGate, and I think there's a SQL Server tool. I forget what it's called.
SSIS,
Yeah, thank you.
integration services.
Right, that kind of does that. So one of the things I think one of them does is like, in the SQL Server backups,
Fluxed.
the SQL Server backup tool.
Yeah.
That you can. One of the things they recommended is like if when you
Just
have
right-click on the
if you have
tray.
a test environment, you take the production backups and then you apply that backup to like nightly. You apply that backup to the test environment so that you can tell. Not you only tell that you always keep refreshing it, but at the same time you always know you have a good backup of production.
Mm.
So that's why they say, and so a lot of tools. I think in Oracle, the new EMS tool kind of does something similar. But I haven't actually read about it yet. But the whole idea now is not just to worry about the schema, but it's also to it's all the data underneath, because all that is just insert.
So the data underneath, though, like first of all, if you're in any sort of regulated environment, there's no effing way that you're going to get a hold of production data, right? That is locked down tighter than you would believe, right?
Okay.
And secondly, if you are trying to get production-like data in any sort of test environment, you'd have to have a scrub, right? It would have to pull like desensitize all of the information within there, randomize people's names, et cetera, in order to be able to pull it down. Thirdly, when you're setting up tests, and he talks about this in the book, what you generally want is different data sets for different testing purposes, right? Like this test needs 1,000 people. This one can only handle 1, right? So I don't know that the versioning, I mean, I guess.
It's kind of, you think of it like found data versus generated data. So when you copy that production, you're dealing with found data. The problem we had with it in e-commerce was you get into these edge cases of an order that's got 5 line items shipping to 3 different people. It was partially refunded. You might find 3 of those in production. So on a single refresh, you can run your test 3 times, now you got to refresh. But if you're doing generated data, you can set up that scenario every single time the test runs.
Yeah.
And it's completely isolated from the other stuff. The only times you're not going to be able to isolate is if you're doing things like alerting on a queue. So if I have more than N number of items in the queue that are too late, then I'll pop an alert. Or if you're doing a report, so if the average sales figure is this, those will have to go serial. Everything else you can go parallel with OTP. But it's going down the road of the generated data is a much better option for that for maintainability.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do, and I forget where I saw this laid out, is you can take a clone of a database with SQL Server at least, and it doesn't have any of the data in it, but what it does have is the statistics, which means that when you run queries against it, you should be getting representative query plans.
That's cool.
Or if you want to version your data and spend some coin or stuff like Delphix, that'll do the masking and the timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah,
versioning data seems like a big expense.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's 5 figures.
And I would, I don't know that it's necessary in most cases.
Yeah.
I mean, there are probably use cases for it, but I don't run across those as often. Anyway, so this is the.
More importantly, how was Guns N' Roses? Was it awesome?
Yeah.
So was the cult or were guns better? The cult opened, right?
Yeah, the cold opened, but I was outside trying to buy the Mercs, and
you
then I was on the floor, so that threw me into another line. So I got in there in the last 10 minutes. But they did play one of my favorite songs. So.
I would have paid just for the cult. I like guns, but I would have paid for the cult, man. All right, now I'm jealous.
All right. What the hell was I talking about, man?
We can play some guns if you want. If it would be like help you get back in it. Sorry, I saw the shirt.
Is this like Google Hangout right now?
Yeah. Who cares? Whatever. No one's listening.
Yes, it is. Okay, so I think
Migrate the database.
I had already done.
You did enable migration.
Okay, and then I did the initial create, which basically scripted a create table for me. And then when I want to go ahead and deploy this to my database locally, I would say update database.
Phil is laughing at you that it's scripted.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So that point is a valid point. That is a valid point, and I'll show you. Just one second here.
Because we've had conversations over the years.
Yeah. So, well, while this is running, when you run the update database, you can tell it to, instead of actually updating, to generate a script, and that's what Phil would prefer to see as the database upgrade script, rather than, so that'll be actual SQL rather than the
curly brace garbage you got here.
Exactly.
Especially since in most shops it's a DBA that's on a different team. Or
yeah. So you would hand the script to the DBA, and the DBA would be the one that actually did the applying. Yes, absolutely.
What about, could you hire like a separate person to carry the script to the DBA?
Only if they have people skills.
Talk to the engineers, damn it.
Oh, good. That was bad.
Interns.
Startup project in, I don't know, can't connect. Oh, did it not create the DB? Oh, no, because the database doesn't exist. You didn't do create if not exists.
Oh, yeah.
But the action string not as a server thing?
It did.
It did. He just didn't do create if not exists.
I didn't actually create the database, and I didn't say create if not exists in the migrate.
TIG.
Yeah,
it's called TIG.
Oh, sorry.
Something.
TIG demo migration or migrations. What one was it? Migrations. Oops, that was the one I wanted. Migrations. Okay, now if we run that again, that was the problem.
This little tiny window he sees in is the package manager console, by the way. You probably can't even see. It's a little,
you can see it
basically
there.
it's PowerShell. It's a little embedded PowerShell console. I I still don't understand why this is the only place to run this tool. Like, it's such a weird place to run this tooling. I feel like they should have like a different, just something different.
I think it should just be called, if it were just called PowerShell, right?
Well, that too, yeah. It's the NuGet package manager console, but it's really just PowerShell. And what you're doing has nothing to do with either of those things, because actually it's not as simple as, I don't think if you just open regular PowerShell right now and typed an update database, it wouldn't know what's going on. So it's only in this PowerShell inside VS that it has the context to do this stuff. It's very weird. I feel like they should just have an EF migration tool window that,
which is just PowerShell with the appropriate plugins installed or whatever.
Slightly different shade of gray.
yeah.
Of Battleship gray.
Well, this looks a little Battleshipy.
But it would be a slightly different. Oh, shiza. I'm still not getting in there.
You're still not connecting?
Let me
Did
make
you
sure.
actually go back to the, did you actually have dot?
You didn't give the user permissions to the database. Right?
Yeah. Thank you. That was it.
What was it?
It was giving user permission.
You gotta go the other way.
Yeah.
I saw you create, or I saw you had the user, but I never saw you add.
Yeah, no.
the user.
He couldn't have because he didn't create the database.
Yeah, exactly.
That too.
Okay, so for
Owner, bro. Owner it up.
No, resist temptation.
Owner it up. That's what I do. Owned it.
Reader, writer, and DDL admin.
Yeah, DBO like a boss. What do you want to do? It doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. Own that thing. This is why Phil cringes, because developers go server admin, sysadmin, DB owner, all those things.
You ever get into this situation where you accidentally, like, you just click everything and you got DB deny reader and deny writer in there?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's like, shit. You have to go back and like uncheck that.
Let me make sure that I
You
can
think the
actually.
GUI could stop people doing that?
Yeah, exactly. Like, check.
You know,
We're good to go.
the SQL Server GUI, the Management Studio GUI, and even the installer's gotten much better, actually. The brand new installer is leaps and bounds better, but the SQL Server GUI people are just terrible at GUIs. There's
It was
just
great until they made it Visual Studio.
there's weird stuff that, like, there's weird bugs in that permission window. There's totally bugs. If you click multiple databases and then try to give them like permission for all of them, you just check it and it's whichever one is checked, and the other two that are checked are ignored. Like, there's just weird stuff, all kinds of weird bugs, and then like windows that don't expand properly and weird
That
defaults.
does happen.
It's terrible, man.
Is it?
Terrible. You good?
If it is, it's going really slowly. No, I'm still bad.
You couldn't log in or what?
I logged in. I logged in
Check your
successfully.
connection string again. It said dot. I missed that part.
It wasn't exaggerating when I said you just generate
Server
scripts
dot
manually.
Database equals TIG demo migrations. Is that what I called it? TIG demo migrations. Yes.
And you logged in correctly?
Yeah, I was thinking copy paste.
It's right. TIG
Yeah, that's
demo
right.
migrations.
I don't trust you.
Demo user. And then that's the password I typed to get in. So I'm
Trust it.
I've never
correct.
logged so straight.
Only
Trusted connection equals true, bro. That would have fixed the problem.
It may.
Just do trusted connection true and move on. We're not testing connection strings.
Trusted
Oh, it's a great website you
connection
can go to.
equals true. Is it with the underscore or not? That's the
It's
question.
a space. It's a great website you can go to called connectionstrings.com.
Yeah. All right, let's do it.
Plastered with ads. I'm telling you, dude, plaster it with ads. You get it.
I actually don't know what the site is.
Oh,
It's Google Connections.
Maybe not that one.
Yeah, that looks right. Hospitagam.
Stole your idea in the last 30 minutes.
There it is. Boom. See how much money he's making on that? Whatever that ad is right there.
SQL Server, and then the
Trusted
question
connection.
Trusted
underscore.
underscore connection
Oh.
true. Problem solved. I don't know how many times we visited that website.
Okay, and then back, and then up, and then enter, and then pray.
Okay, well, it should be way faster.
I
Should be
know.
way faster. Why don't you verbose it?
No, you know what? I bet it is. I got it. Ho, ho, ho. Oh, whoops. CTOR.
But it's what?
I called my connection string
The wrong
default. I don't know what the hell the default is, but it's probably not default.
Remember last time when Scott did a demo and it failed miserably? Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
You got to be a Reddit dork to get that. That's 2 people laughed. They're on Reddit.
No cake that
Well, model first. Just want to model first. This will create the
I
connection string
hate
for
it
you
so
and all the
much.
code.
I hate it. So you're still failing, by the way.
And it would tell you what's wrong.
Bam.
Default, it does not contain required provider name
provider.
attribute.
Yeah.
I love this. There's this cool site called connectionstrings.com.
Yeah, but then the SQL Server page has like 80 connection strings.
I know, because
Exactly.
that's why they built that website, because you have no idea. There's
Or
too
like
many.
10 for 80.
But you don't know which one to use.
Yeah, I always hated that. You get there and you're like,
Now what?
which one is it?
Yeah.
So I'm going to create SQL Server connectionstrings.com that clarifies.
Yeah, there you go. And then you can put your ad on that.
Yeah.
Just skip that in your framework.
Okay.
Woo!
We have success. Okay,
Running
so,
seed method. All right, good job.
so finally, it created our table here with people, and it created our full name column.
That was
And then as you basically update your application, you're just going to change code.
What was the data
Not,
type on it?
I'm sorry.
What was the data type on it?
Oh, yes, that's a good point, Phil. I'm glad you mentioned that because it would be varchar max, which would be horrible. So we would
Actually,
say
I believe
string
it was
length.
more horrible than that.
It was text.
I think it was in varchar max.
Yeah. I
So
think
in
it-
varchar max is actually better than varchar max in my personal opinion because I happen to realize that there are languages other than English in the world.
You do know
But-
there's other countries.
But you know, that's to each their own. I
Ah,
guess.
Canada.
You also have to talk in hard drive manufacturers.
Canada speaks American too. It's fine. Come on.
Oh, God, come on, man. Why is it there? That one. Why is it not the default? Alt Enter Enter.
They broke some of the defaults or like changed. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now I want to add a.
So now you're doing a
would
schema
have been-
change.
Yeah, I'm doing an
A
email.
structure change and
Yep.
a new column and a column data type change.
Yeah, and actually, let me go ahead and I happen to know that an email should be 256. Okay. And then now that I have made that change, we're going to go into the package manager console.
But Scott, what would happen if you tried to run your app right now without running your migration?
It would blow up. And it would say, I have a difference between what my model is that I've constructed and the database, what the database is at. And so I'm going to add a added email migration.
Is it doing a live comparison or is it have like a tracking table?
There's a tracking table.
Underscore migration history.
Yeah. So if we look in here, you probably can't see it here. Let me run like something like Zoom it. What is that?
Dude, your console's big enough. See that?
You want to demonstrate irony?
You know, that's all thanks to the glory of Windows. Totally screwing with fonts since 1990. All right, so yeah, here
But thanks to
is the
Bruce,
current.
you can copy and paste.
Yeah, thank God.
And it doesn't have that. You can actually drag the size of the window and it wraps. It's
Yeah.
like the best improvement to CMD ever. Basically, the only reason to install Anniversary Edition is the new CMD stuff. You have to turn it on, but turn it on because you can actually copy and paste.
But then it breaks Visual Studio.
Oh yeah, yeah. It breaks this.
Yeah, the reinstall.
Like, so you launch Visual Studio and it says, this package failed, this package failed, and every single package fails. And it says, would you like to continue? And you say yes. And then you end up with an empty window that just looks like Visual Studio and can't do anything. And so I didn't even try to troubleshoot it. I just hit reinstall Visual Studio or repair Visual Studio and it was fine. So.
You know what was interesting is it did not pick that up.
The email?
You didn't run it. No, it
Yeah, it
is.
did.
Yeah,
it did.
Oh, it didn't pick up
It
the
didn't pick
column
up the
size
column
change.
size change.
Interesting.
I know.
Is it a safety thing since you're making it smaller?
No, it should let you do that.
That's very strange.
I haven't seen that sort of restraint from EF before. They usually just go, yeah, whatever. Truncate
Yeah,
the column.
exactly. Yeah, screw it. Just truncate the thing. Yeah, still, it's not detecting it.
How do you know that it didn't detect it just by seeing that?
No, I just tried to add a
Oh,
migration.
I
and
just
there
thought it was
nothing in
empty.
there.
I didn't realize it was empty.
Yeah, yeah, so that's very weird, and I'm not sure why that's happening right now.
Why don't you go back into SSMS and refresh the table?
I did.
That's why he has email for 256 there.
Yeah, it was there. Email.
It just didn't
there.
change the nvarchar max there.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Weird.
I know, it is weird.
Did you refresh it from there?
Yes.
Try editing directly, see if you set it to 50 and then rerun it and see if it'll up it instead.
Oh, it won't even know that it went down to 50 though, because it tracks that in migration history. So even if you modified the schema in the database, it wouldn't know. EF wouldn't know that
Why
it
it
changed.
didn't change to 100.
Well, it should know in migration history that it's set to nvarchar max, and so adding an attribute string length should have triggered it to see, oh, that's different, and so
Yeah.
it should have done that, but apparently it's not. What happens if you change the string length on email? Since it did originally put one in, what if you lower that to 50 or something? Does it pick that up?
Email smaller. Yep.
Interesting.
And he talked about this in the book as well. It's important to have an up and a down. That way you can roll back and forward to a version in time.
The reality is, though, rolling back data is...
Well, rolling back data.
Yeah.
Right. What we're talking about here is schema,
Sure.
right? And I actually mentioned that one in the
schema in the case where you want to go backwards in time and test. You want to create a schema of an old database and run a test. That's possible, but the reality is you really can't roll back in databases. Like,
so
no such
we had
thing.
that situation at the thing that I worked at, the company that I worked at in 2014, where they needed data rollbacks to actually save the data because they would roll back and then re-roll forward right away in certain cases. So they didn't have a fill in the holes. What they had was, oh crap, I've detected a hole and I'm higher. So roll back to the prior to the hole, fill in the hole, and then roll forward again. And because of that, all of their undo scripts basically stuck the data into temp tables. And so when you're rolling back, it just populates all these temp tables. And then when you roll forward again, it checks, oh, is there something in the temp table? If so, put that in there, you know.
Yikes. And then
Yeah, so that
hopefully
made their scripts more complicated than they need to be. You can see here, this is two versions of the same script, right? One that just says screw it, alter table, and the other that's like, well, if there's this data already, then go ahead and take it and put it in there. Otherwise, you know, and then basically change the.
I think the answer is you should just say there's no rollback in databases. You just can't. You roll forward.
Roll forward is definitely a trend.
You just roll forward.
If you're going to do a rollback with data, you're generally going to be a little choosier. Like you're not going to do it on every single table.
Well, but
depends on how.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? A rollback in data is restore from backup. Like what? I mean, if you've lost data, you've lost data. You got to pull it from a backup, right?
Well, the idea is that you did the temp table and then you pop it back in.
Oh, yeah, but nobody does that.
The problem I have with the way they describe it in the book, though, is that he talks about, oh, you know, just copy it back in. But your app was not read-only.
That's why I'm saying there's no rollback in
even
database.
Once you do the rollback, you're still a synchronization that has to happen.
Right. Yeah, that's why the reality is I
addressed
don't.
that a little bit, though. He said that he had something to. He said reconcile the transactions that happen between.
Oh, the logs.
Like his
He
replay.
said, yeah, replay the logs or something like that.
He said something about basically allowing the transactions to continue through on the old version of the database.
Yeah, it's
I
a good
didn't-
theory, but
Yeah, I have no idea how.
the reality
he
is,
could
what you're
have
hearing from
done
Brad is most shops are just going to roll forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Ike's opinion of this whole topic was that you shouldn't tell managers and those such that there's even such a thing as rollback in databases because they think like, oh, you rolled out and you screwed something up. Oh, just roll back. And like you said, your database was not read-only when the problem occurred.
But that's the paradigm.
State has changed. It's not easy.
Going back to the snapshot, right? Like that's what people, they're like, what's your rollback plan or your backup plan, right? And
Right, but that's a totally faulty backup plan because then you go, oh, we backed up. What happened to those 50 sales I made? Oh, we lost all those.
Those go away.
Yeah, and so then
Those
that's
go
not
We
acceptable
have to get
either.
them back, sure, we rolled off the one that we
Yeah,
rolled back.
you can get them back.
Here.
Yeah,
Now what you're gonna do is spend the next 2 weeks.
You can call them back and tell them to run that order again if you want, but
Spend more money on advertising.
Yeah.
They'll come back.
we saved all their phone numbers. Just call them and say, place your order again.
Well, the other upside is if you do the DB deployment part first, you can actually have the opportunity to pound that system in a backward compatibility mode and test it to the nth degree before you actually go live with it.
Right.
Yeah, so if you do your model where you support current version and next version in parallel.
Because thanks to state, it's always going to be easier to roll back an app version.
Yes, absolutely. But don't you still have the problem of your database is not read-only, and so new data got inserted in a way that.
Right, but
I guess the schema.
It's easier to mitigate. It's easier. You're like, especially if you go blue-green on the farm, on the app farm, and so you can detect problems a lot faster. It's like we did deployments where we did the 2 halves of the system where only 1 half was active at a time, and we did 10%, 50%, 100% traffic.
Someone's what?
Live on YouTube.
We got two.
Oh my
we got a
God.
question.
Yeah, or some comments and questions.
Is it from Honduras?
No, it's from Paul.
It's
Oh,
from
Paul. Wow, it's just
Okay,
Paul.
yeah.
No, not that Paul.
It's a different Paul.
Okay, Paul Mendes.
Oh, he was supposed to be here because I wanted him to demo his whole strategy.
Well, he said, sorry, joined late, thought the meeting was next week, never do rollbacks, use backups if you have to, do test rollbacks well, and do you take the app down while upgrading your databases?
Do you take the what?
App
App down while upgrading your databases.
Well, he doesn't, right? 'Cause he's got his
Right.
own-
So after
So-
6 years, I worked with 0 downtimes.
Yeah,
Now I
but-
have maintenance windows, and I'm happy for it.
What I like is upgrading the app to be able to speak both, and then upgrading the database, and then upgrading the app to remove the old, right?
Which is kind of what you're
Which
saying.
is kind of what you're
Generally,
doing,
gonna
but
wanna
you're
do
doing it in
is
reverse.
Put your adds and changes on the database in one release, and put your drops and deletes in the next release.
Yeah.
And
But
so
I
you're
do
saving
it.
your
I do it
data.
on the app side rather than the database side.
Right, it's
But
the
same
conservative approach.
idea. Yeah. And you have to do that also, not just when it's an app and a database, but when it's a client and a server, and the protocol changes, you have to be able to. The server has to be able to support both versions first. Then you can update the client to speak the new version, right? So there would be a 2-phase rollout in that case as well.
So to make the app handle both versions of the database, do you make like a second method that matches the new structure?
Well, when
Feature
it's reading out, right? So when it's writing in, it has to write it in a compatible manner, and when it's reading out, it has to read it out in a compatible manner. So there's 2 different questions, and depends on how you've altered the database. But
Like, do you put branching inside of that method, or do you make 2 methods? Like,
Feature toggle.
you
like-
may write in 2 places, right? If
Yeah.
you're writing,
Yeah.
and if you're reading, you'll read out the data and decide which one to use. Like if you've got like an extra column which may or may not be there, you have to support it being there or not. It depends on kind of the change you're making, but it's always fairly easy to think about and
What's that?
Which
Redundant
EF
till
does
replace.
great.
Yeah. EF does not.
Redundant until replace. In that situation as well, that's a strategy you can use, is basically have both systems, both versions of the code performing the operation, and then just get rid of one later once it's proven itself to operate properly on.
that's more like canary release.
And
Yeah.
If you're in a load balance farm, but like, so I'm doing something right now, this app that's kicking and screaming its way to Azure. It's not data related, but it's IO, it's disk IO. All the files were on a local disk and we're migrating them to Azure, and we're supporting both concurrently. And so it will go and have a feature toggle to see if it should even check Azure, basically. Should it even think that the data might be here? And if it should check, it'll go ask and say, do you have it? And if you don't have the data, we're just gonna go back to the old version and say, well, I assume it's still on the old server. So we're just saying, like, can you speak Azure to start? Can you speak this new protocol? And then if you can, we'll use that. And if something catastrophic happens, we'll just fall back to the old version. And then eventually I'll delete that second branch in the code. That the feature toggle that says if use Azure is turned on, it'll go away and the old code will go away.
His next comment, he says, you don't have to say this, which I'm gonna say it. But I think entity framework migrations are the worst.
Any follow-up or just I think they're the worst? Paul, you got anything else?
Can you reply, have you seen connectionstrings.com?
There's this great website.
So there's only 10 seconds away, so.
All right. Well, give us your
10
follow-up
seconds from
about
now, why. Yeah, we'll find out why. Oops, sorry. Okay, so the next section he talks about is managing test data. So that was getting to your point of now I want to support different versions of, or different data within the database, forget schema. I want to have, these rows for this test and these other rows for this different test. And the first thing, which is
Quick question
totally
before you go
valid.
further. You had mentioned something about nhibernate. Were we going to show that? I know we're running short on time, but did you want to mention, were you going to show migrations in Hibernate?
I can.
That's not a big deal. I just didn't know if you missed that or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it works
Doesn't
very
matter.
similarly.
All right,
In
that's
fact, it
fine.
works
That's fine.
similarly across any language, right? So you're going to have something that initializes the migration, something that adds the migration, and then something that will apply a migration to a database. And it's generally always command line-ish.
Okay. And I don't know RedGate super well, so correct me if I'm wrong here, Phil, but ready roll is essentially this, but on the database side, right? It will.
Ready roll is migration scripts.
Yeah, it'll
Right.
scaffold and create migration scripts to go up and down and that sort of thing, like DF just did, but on the
Down
SQL
is
side.
manual.
Oh, down is manual. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, but either
it's all up-three scripts, but it's, you know how the regular source control is all the declarative model? It's all create, proc, create table. This is only state transitions. It actually gets a hell of a lot more confusing than that because it actually combines both models. But their idea is that we'll put that project in the same solution as your app code, and that's why it's easier to manage the two together to the point of, one app, one database.
Okay, cool.
So both ways.
Okay, so I'll bring up that. That'll take a while to load. That solution's gigantic. As
It's just
Jim-
called cloud.
as
It's the
Jim
entire
knows.
cloud.
It is the entire cloud.
Yeah, it pretty much is. Yeah.
Everything.
Okay, but while that's loading, so let's talk about test data. And the first and most important point is you have to have some form of abstraction which lets you select whether I'm talking to the real database or a fake database of any type, right? And he talks about the repository pattern as the most common pattern for allowing that to happen. And then he talks about the in-memory type databases, which I actually think are the best way to handle, if you're going to do large amounts of data, if you're not talking about single rows for like a unit test type thing, where I want to read the database and get this record back and I can just create that record in code, no problem. If you're talking about, complex data interactions of like, order and order line items and product and category, and they're all slightly related, and I need to get the whole tree out, right? I like the idea of using something like SQLite or another in-memory database that can persist its data to a file, and then just basically saying my test database for this test is this file, my test database for this test is this other file. So you just basically save that file, and that becomes the database that test loads and serves data from. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Um,
And that's different from what we've done previously we've done an in-memory implementation where we actually implemented it in code. Right?
yeah, and for small unit tests, that's the best way.
Yeah, that's simple and it's
Yeah.
fast, but like you said, and there's complex relationships and a multi-step pattern that causes destructive data and that sort of thing, like inserting records, and that gets way too complicated to do in code and way too brittle.
Yeah.
Are you going to violate NDA by opening this?
No.
Okay.
Doesn't matter because the video's gone.
Is
The
it?
video's gone?
Paul says, don't you have to migrate each of those test databases?
Did you stop sharing your screen? Has it been gone for like ever?
No, it says still sharing right here. Hello.
I still see it. I'm in the Hangouts, but I'm in the Hangouts, so I don't know. Maybe it'll come back. All right. Quickly
Okay,
then.
so here, so same sort of situation. You basically, they're doing auto increment here, but they allow holes. And the way they do it, this is funny. The way they do it here is to create a migration script. It's like the DMV. You go to the DMV and you take a ticket, right? And the ticket has a number on it. And so regardless of where that is checked in, right, I have a number. And so if you go to like our desks, at this particular company, you'll see a bunch of tickets lying around, which are all of our migrations, right? And
Wait, it's a
everybody,
physical ticket?
A physical ticket. All of the developers have them.
Brilliant things that they do.
You just
Yeah.
call in and ask them to pull a ticket for you when
Yes,
you're remote?
exactly. That's exactly.
Do you-
Jim and I have both done that to each other.
Do you have
Like,
to wait
hey, can
6
you
to
grab a
8
ticket?
hours to get that ticket processed, like at the DMV?
No,
You just
no.
sit around and wait until they
So
get
all
it?
you really need is the number and making sure that no one else will get that number, right? So that's why the physical ticket, if you steal it,
an arrow, like
no, that would be awesome.
Like Baskin Robbins.
It's-
What are you
it's
talking
like-
about? The old Baskin Robbins.
It's like raffle tickets. They got a raffle ticket. for it. Yeah.
My God.
You need the paper tickets. with
That
the arrow.
seems like it would be
So they, like,
chaos.
shuffle them up at the end of the night.
It's not.
Your migration's
Yeah.
happening.
It works. Nobody just like snags a ticket off someone's desk or drops a ticket on the floor.
Well, no, because you know that would be stupid. Like, you know that you'd be setting yourself up for failure there.
No shortage of tickets.
I feel like you should have a simple little hip chat or Slack integration that you just say /migration ticket and it'll just generate you a number. That'd be much easier than physical tickets. Right? Actually, it would cost you like $3,000 to build that integration. So I guess you could buy a lifetime supply of tickets for that.
You gotta imagine,
Yeah, paper tickets for the rest of your life for that price.
you gotta imagine the failures that you had to have experienced to get to the point where we're switching to a physical ticketing system.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's easy to see. It's easy to see. You're auto incrementing, and then you start using branches. Bam, failure. Yeah, total failure. So as soon as they put in, it's probably when they went to Git, right? Like 6 years ago or something. They're like, oh, let's switch from SVM to Git. Oh, good.
So this is up and down and in Hibernate. That looks identical to me. So
yeah, it's very similar. Yeah. So this is using Fluent in Hibernate migrations. Yeah, but it's very similar.
All right,
exactly.
Cool.
So does anybody ever like just put in like name it the wrong ticket number?
It took me like 2 or 3 months before anyone even told me about the tickets, so I would just make them up. Nobody called me on it.
Somebody already used that number.
Yeah.
They're like, wait, that ticket doesn't exist. What are you talking about, ticket? I just made that number up.
All right. Never mind.
So there you go. So it's a useless system.
The thing that sucks is that only works in a co-located team, right? That would not work for remote.
Well, it does clearly. You call Jim and he pulls the ticket for you.
Yeah, if you just like hire somebody like a Mechanical Turk or someone to sit in India with the raffle ticket.
Excuse me, RedGate, what's the ticket number?
The screen is still down.
Maybe stop sharing and start sharing again. I still see it on the
Nothing
Hangout.
was really happening, Paul. Don't worry.
Dude, you missed the. It's good. We purposely stopped it for that little NDA presentation. It's clearly purposely done.
Google's already closed that feature.
Right, well, there's that. We'll wait 10 minutes for the delay in YouTube here.
Okay, so I don't really have anything right now. Okay, sweet.
So test data. So we said in-memory repository or in-memory that can persist to a
Database.
file-based system like SQLite or
SQLite or something. Yeah. I think
What's
that's the best way.
Local DB? Isn't Local DB one of those you can use to do that too? SQL servers new
I
Local
don't know.
DB.
Yeah, maybe, but I've had issues with that, and so I avoid it like the plague. But
So from a code perspective, if you do something like SQLite, the repository pattern is simpler, right? Because it's just a connection string swap. But if you do a physical in-memory implementation, it's a re-implementation of all these repository pattern interfaces, right? Like we did in AZ or whatever, we had to re-implement. But if you just say, well, I'm just going to go to SQLite instead of real SQL Server, that's just a different connection string. Like you said, this test runs this connection string, which is your file, nothing else has to change.
yeah, I mean, I think
that seems simpler.
That's true to a point. If they have a different, like, I don't know if Entity Framework supports SQLite, does it? Yeah. I don't know if like it would depend on the compatibility of your ORM and your physical and in-memory versions of your database. It may just be a connection string swap, but if there's an API differences or it doesn't support it, then you'll have to rewrite.
I mean, so one thing we talked about too was having a test full-on, like just a full-on test SQL Server database, maybe with a baseline backup file that's restored or whatever, because sometimes you want to run a test that causes destructive data and then roll back the database.
That's why I like
the
the SQLite. The restoring of if you have a database of any significant schema size, then even the backup and restore can be messy, time consuming.
Yeah, we never even do backup restore. It'd be like VMs or containers.
Yeah.
You get a catalog that's got it's all in.
Yeah.
SQLite developers have published the Entity Framework support up to 6.
Cool.
Up to 6.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you didn't read 10, like we skipped it, but we did recommend read 10, like we said. That's a really good chapter.
Well, at least those pages that we called.
Yeah, at least that chunk. And I haven't read past 12, so I don't know the rest.
I haven't read past 12 either.
It's pretty much the end of the book, so we're going to call it the end of the DevOps thing. So just to
yeah.
He makes a statement in there about when you're creating test data, you should use the application's API as much as
making the customer use a make call. What if you're trying to test like edge cases or verify bug fixes? Where...
Jason had one of these scenarios. I think it was Jason. You had one scenario where it was like, does this ring a bell to you? Do you remember? I thought there was something where you were trying to test, and it was a question of whether you should go through the API to do it. But the reality was, like,
there was no API.
There was no API to do. Like, there wasn't a way to do it. Somehow,
I think
data
it's
got in
like
this state,
try to, but if you have a situation where you can't, then obviously you'll have to do a, you know, a workaround, a direct write or something like that.
Create a brand new API to just cause that bug.
Yeah.
Actually, I have done that.
Slash bugs.
I have done a API which does like a bulk generate strictly for the purpose of, you know, testing or whatever. Right. I have done that before.
We've done some, like, we do one thing where it's we allow you to, the latest one we evolved into is a totally different site, but for a while we allowed you to say, like, basically test equals true. I worked at multiple companies that allow you to say test equals true on a query string in a web app, and just it will switch to the test database. And so, like, you're going through the actual web page, but you just flip over to test, and then you run some commands as a user, and that inserts into the test database. But I think there's also cases where you want to craft the data, like you said, manually, and then like burn that backup file and say that this test uses this crazy scenario that I never knew existed, except I cloned it from production because somehow it happened, and you know, and there's no way I'm going to create these 50,000 records just like this, so I'll just copy them.
Because the other one we would hit, it's like, well, you have to go through like 5 asynchronous steps before you get to the start of the test. And it's like running through each of them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a way that you can create procedures that write to these tables and basically generate the proc off the system metadata. But at some point, you still have to say, this is the data I want to put in that table.
Yeah.
Like, what data goes to my test case?
Yeah. And I think it would be interesting to kind of couple that with capacity testing, performance testing, because like my order table hit 1 million records and all of a sudden the indexes fall over or whatever happened, right? And now the performance is terrible on that. You're not going to go through the front end and create 1 million records. You're just going to, here's a backup with 1 million records, run capacity tests on it. So you can kind of instrument the data. Okay, so what Scott's got up is our next set of topics that we've been throwing around, ideas. We'll take, the way we do it is to take a vote. If the YouTubers are around, Paul, you can vote as well. So last month we talked about like React, and then a couple other have come up since, and then we pulled some of these from our previous list, which was prior to the Python track. We took a vote, but that was so long. That was over a year ago now, a year and a half ago maybe. Things have changed a bit. So we'll run down the list. So UI design, there's a program, not a program, what's the word? A web series called Hack Design, hackdesign.org, I think. And it's their focus is on UI design sensibilities for the developer. So if you're a developer, but you want to know what the heck a designer is talking about when they talk about things like typography and letter kerning and font spacing and what Photoshop things mean. And so I think that's a skill set that a lot of developers lack, and it becomes, you know, I think you're a more well-rounded developer if you can speak some of those things. And so my idea behind that would be to follow the Hack Design series. We're going to skip around a little bit. There's like 50, I think, or 60 like individual lessons. We would hand pick a handful of those, and then also have maybe Greg or somebody come in and show us some like Photoshop skills, some basic Photoshop skills, so you learn some of the tooling.
Functional hooks.
And then, so that's the idea behind the UI design. It's not, you know, an art class. It's how to be competent as a developer doing UI design. And then Linux was your idea.
Yeah, so I feel like it's a good time for Linux because, well, we now have the Bash shell, as Brad showed last time, you know, in Windows, and with Docker and, you know, things like that, you're starting to, you know, run Amazon. Linux. Yeah, Amazon. Yes, EC2. Yeah, exactly. EC2 instances. It's starting to become more and more
for the Microsoft
crowd. For the Microsoft crowd too. It's becoming more and more important for them to understand how to get around in Unix, or Linux in particular, I guess.
.NET SQL Server running on Linux.
Yeah, with
exactly.
the .NET Core being cloud platform.
I
Yeah.
make a connection string in Linux.
Connection strings.com.
Now that you're using Bash on Windows, you can go switch to using PowerShell on Linux.
Yeah.
Exactly. PowerShell runs in Linux. Yeah, they just did it. Yeah, so I think there's a lot. The Microsoft crowd, to be a modern Microsoft developer, you have to be capable in getting around a Linux shell. So that was the idea. So there's 2 books we found. One that we liked a little better. I think the other one I liked better, the Linux command line, a more modern book, a more modern approach to learning
I
Linux.
remember
command.
we did back and forth on it. Where was it though? Do you remember?
It was in the main room. You're not going to find. No, don't look there. You're not going to find it there.
There.
Oh, look at that. You do find it. I forgot I showed images. So the command line one is the one I like, not the images.
Yeah. So this Unix for the Impatient is like the way you used to learn Unix, right? Like that was like the classic how you learn Unix. Like this is the known accepted book. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think a lot of people do, right? People that know Unix, and knew Unix 10 years ago probably had this book, right? But then this one was like a really highly rated, the Linux command line. It's that same series that like Python making things, automate the hard things or something like that. Okay. It looks like it's
vomiting.
It's like a Popeye robot. It's chugging spinach, and then it's gonna do the thing.
So
anyway, so those are the 2 books.
So it would be Linux specifically, not Unix, and it would be the basics of Linux. I mean, Linux is a topic that'll take us 10 years probably. So it'll be the basics of Linux and how to be competent in the shell and know shell commands and know how to get around the shell.
Yeah. And then that would go well if we wanted to talk about .NET Core, the next topic. I don't want to do it yet because it's still too new and there's some massive changes underway.
And some books to be written before we can actually do a book club.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but if we did Linux first, that would set us up for success there.
Yeah. So then the next topic was React. That was the one we talked about last month. That was kind of like becoming hot and popular for a JavaScript framework and a native code framework. Competitive to Angular.
That was so last week, Brad.
Sorry. Popcorn JS. I'm still going to do that talk.
What's the automated acceptance testing tool for React?
Well, it's just JavaScript.
Yeah,
so
JavaScript. So it would be
Chimp. That's what you use.
Chimp.
You use
Chimp.
I use
Chimp.
.NET Core you can delete out of there. We're not going to do that. And then these other ones are ones that we've had for a while. So clean code refactoring, unit testing, just in general, the practice of clean code, and it would be like Michael Feather's book and stuff like that.
It'd be Martin's book.
Yeah, Fowler's book and Feather's book on unit testing. And Martin Fowler.
No. Robert C. Martin. Uncle Bob.
Oh, Uncle Bob. Yeah.
Clean code. The clean code book.
Yeah.
The one that's black.
No, it's got like a
galaxy on it. I think it is
galaxy.
black, but it's got a galaxy on it in blue. Anyway,
it's a great book.
That's kind of a more general practices software engineering one. It would probably be C# focused from examples, just because we have so much of them, but it could be anywhere.
So now about that.
Cloud development that's been around forever, but I don't know if that's super relevant. I mean, it's just
Not that.
I mean, I don't know that it's worthwhile to do a book club on it because it's just it's a massive topic and there's so many specific avenues you could go down. I don't know if we'd do a general purpose book.
The guy who wrote Thomas Selly.
The guy that wrote what?
He wrote if you go to Amazon, it's
Cloudnomics. I bought that book. That was the one you recommended last time.
No, that was not it.
The guy who wrote Thomas Limoncelli.
Thomas Limoncelli.
He wrote System and Network Administration.
Thomas the Train?
No. That's the name of the author, but I mean.
Wait.
Thomas.
Yeah, that one. Cloud System Administration.
That's amazing.
That is amazing.
Thomas
System Administration.
He's the only guy named Thomas that wrote a book about system administration. Okay, click his name.
Yeah, but he wrote there's another book before that. Another book he wrote before that one that is like a huge thing in system administrators. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, practice of
system. So he wrote that one, but that one's his next. That was.
It looks like Victor. Doesn't he?
Kind of.
Yeah. But that's a very good cloud book.
This one.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
So that's one.
So there's one. All right, back to your topic list.
Yeah. Yep.
I know we have node mean stack on there. Oh, we have functional programming. So everyone should learn one object-oriented language, one functional language, one dynamic language, one statically typed language, one interpreted language, one compiled language. So functional is an aspect that you should learn. F# is the .NET approach. We might talk about Scala. We might talk about any of these other functional languages. So
Stead had a couple recommendations on that.
yeah. So I mean, it would be
Scala for the impatient and
Yeah.
functional programming in Scala.
Yeah.
If there are folks that
Yeah.
No,
And then there's Node.js and Mongo. The mean stack, we call it Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. So that's just a web framework stack in JavaScript on how to develop applications. JavaScript on the front end, JavaScript on the back end, NoSQL data stuff.
What was the one with React instead of Angular that was like, it was like Yarn? Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
What was that?
We just replace Angular with React.
Yeah.
No.
Mern.
MERN,
MERN?
M-E-R-N. Mongo, Express,
I
React.
feel like that was
Yeah, there it
Yeah,
is.
MERN.
Yeah.
MERN.io.
Mongo, Express, React, Node, Redux, Webpack. Interesting.
Yeah, this is one of those things where it's a whole bunch of frameworks and it's opinionated and, everybody's got their different approach. So it might be.
Murmuru.
All right, next back
Sounds
to
like
your
a
list.
really bad pronunciation of menu. It's murmuru.
Click on the Mernru, dude.
Oh, and then, so this would be cross-platform mobile in JavaScript, not Xamarin and not Titanium and not the other ones that compile to native, but this would be JavaScript class platform. So Ionic is Angular based, and then Cordova is used to be PhoneGap.
I haven't found a good book for it.
Me either.
Yeah, so it'd probably be a web
there's-
series.
Yeah, more web series, yeah.
NoSQL at scale, that's really old. I don't know.
That's probably
It's
Ike's
Ike. Yeah, I'm not
recommendation.
sure what
Well,
we
we'll
do there.
we'll just
But
draw the
big
line
data.
right there.
We just
There
say
we
big data. Advanced database. Okay.
He's in Honduras. He can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we don't have a whole. Well, we have a decent amount.
Paul wants to know what version of Linux.
So no, it'd probably
Windows version.
it'd probably be Ubuntu. It would be Ubuntu.
It would be agnostic to.
So in the
version.
book, in that book that we're thinking about picking, he says in the beginning, most of the things he talks about are going to be agnostic among the modern distros, modern fully capable distros, not the ones you can run on a floppy disk and stuff. But he starts with Ubuntu as the recommended one for general purpose. But I would say it would be any Red Hat clone or any Fedora clone or Debian clone. So you get Ubuntu or you get CentOS or Red Hat or SUSE, that probably all would be fine. It's just going to be mainly shell stuff, so I don't think we're going to get specific in that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we did 3 votes last time. 1, 2, 3. Is that how we did it? And we counted didn't we do first round, second round, third round? But we're not.
Let's do 2 until we get crazy. Let's just do
1 vote and then
votes.
tiebreakers, or first choice, second choice.
No, let's just do 2 votes. You get 2 votes. We'll just eliminate some topics.
Okay. All right. 2 votes. We'll start at the top. We'll just raise our hands, and then if Paul's online, throw in your 2 votes, and we'll count them. So UI design. Who wants to go UI design? Damn.
I don't know. I could be down with it. 1,
All right.
2, 3, 4.
Okay,
All right,
4.
that's 4.
Yeah, in this round, a low number doesn't mean it's limited.
No.
Okay. Linux.
Linux.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Did I get that right?
Did you get me? My second.
7, 8. No, 9, 10. 10.
11 with Paul. He has 1 vote for that.
1 vote for Linux. Okay.
All right. React.js. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Paul,
Yeah.
does he have a second vote? No.
He does have a second vote, but it wasn't that.
Okay.
Wait.
Clean code or factoring unit testing. 1, 2, 3.
Just because Chris is going to teach it. So we haven't told him that.
Cloud development.
1.
Thanks for bashing it.
Agreed, too broad.
It's a big system.
That could do
Well,
it.
yeah, we
could
take
do
your
it.
votes and pretend like we care, but we're really just going to pick whatever we want. It's a dictatorship, really.
Functional programming. Oh, good lordy.
Wait a minute. Remember, you only get 2 votes.
1,
Don't
2,
cheat the system.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Wow.
Not a poll.
You might have to start taking names.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, we're taking on the honor system. You're not triple voting.
Node or mean.
Is that Paul's vote?
1 hour with Paul.
Okay.
And Ionic and Cordova, I think you're all out of votes at this point, right? Anybody even have a vote left? Yeah, Ionic and Cordova is 0. All right, so we ended up with functional programming and Linux. So Linux wins.
Kearney instead would vote for functional.
That doesn't count. They're not here, man. Doesn't count. All right, so we're down to Linux and functional programming. So now you get 1 vote between those two.
Yeah.
You're gonna clean that up? All right.
Well, I'll just.
It doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. All right. So 1 vote between those two, Linux or functional programming. So who wants to do Linux? You get 1 vote.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
All sticking with Linux.
9.
9. Was that your vote and Paul's vote?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Wait.
Fun.
Oh, wait, a bunch more people just logged in and they all voted for Linux.
All right. Functional programming.
Functional programming. Ooh, it's getting close.
7.
7.
No, this is good. So we usually stack 2 topics so that we can get prepped. So we'll do Linux and then we'll do functional programming. So next session will be Linux. And then we don't know how long that will go. We're going to get the book and we're going to figure out, we'll post, we need to get the book. Yeah. We'll post to me. We need to get the book and make sure it's not crazy. So don't buy the book right away. I mean, you can, but we may not use that book. So try to get the book or try to figure out the book. And then we're probably going to try to find some web content or something too, because that book's going to be pretty dry. And then, and we'll try to find a mentor that actually knows Linux, because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So
I could do it.
Whitburn as well.
yeah, I know Paul and Jim can do it. So they're going to do it basically.
That's a 10-year track, you said?
Yeah, like 10.5 years. Yeah. So we did. I mean, Python was a very. Python was a very long track and straight into the advanced topics at the end, and then we tried to do like a shorter track and not quite beginner, but more middle of the road with DevOps, and it's shorter. So Linux, I suspect, will be a little bit longer, and we'll probably start from beginner and ramp up, kind of like Python did. So by the end, we're probably doing crazy stuff.
I'm thinking 4 max.
4 months. I mean, we could go for years.
4 is enough.
Yeah,
Good.
Like,
We may be able to schedule meetings for you, but we couldn't go
Yeah,
for
that's
you.
true.
Yeah, exactly. Our attendance would drop to,
well, I mean,
But
how far you
like,
go,
what
it's
kind
just
of
bad. I feel
concepts
like-
are you worried that we won't cover?
I'm
or
thinking,
that we
yeah.
need to cover that are.
I don't know. I mean, so there's going to be like
Here, I'll pull up
the basics.
contents.
Yeah, Paul, there's going to be the basics of the shell and bash, and then the basics of how, I think really we want to see how Linux is different from Windows, just because we're primarily Microsoft people.
So, but like,
And then like administering Linux to some degree, like networking stack, firewalling, file permissions,
so the biggest thing for me.
and then a little bit about databases. And, yeah, text searching, text searching, file administration.
Where in the...
But then like there'll be things that are very common that we don't do on Windows at all, like SSH. So like nobody on Windows really even knows how to do SSH. They haven't even baked SSH. It doesn't work. But if you're going to manage AWS, you have to know how to SSH and how to do interactive sessions and how to do interactive terminal. And so, there's a lot.
Where is the read? Look inside. Jesus. I was looking all over the place there. Okay, so holy mother.
I told you, it's a huge book, man.
All right, so learning the shell, navigation, exploring,
File
files and
manipulation,
directories,
commands.
working with commands. I know, I'm thinking so too. Redirection.
Some of it
Some
will.
It's not the stuff you need to read, like, how does MV work? Well, it's move. Okay, I've done move before.
Yeah, right. So some of it will be simple.
Keyboard
But some of the like input-output redirection with grepping and piping, like some of that stuff is.
Okay, that was all
Right,
part
it's
1.
pretty straightforward.
That
It is, but if you've
first-
never seen it before,
Permission schemes and how they
Yeah.
they are from the Windows.
yeah, file permissions are crazy.
Yeah. So permissions is 9, processes. Okay, so all of that is part 1. And then you got configuration in the environment.
And then a whole month on VI.
And why it's so easy to hack.
A whole month on VI.
Storage media.
You guys will all learn how to use the best text editor known
Sticking
to
in
man.
Roman numerals, like,
20 minutes of Emacs will just be like, well, if you're in Emacs, here's how you quit Emacs.
No, that would
If you're
be
in
VI.
VI, you never quit.
No, that would be VI. How do you quit VI?
Come on, Shift: Command Q / left arrow. Why is it so hard? Come on.
Process of having gone to edit mode in, 25 years.
Classes, character classes.
So we'll skip a
I
little.
would just like poop emoji using that.
A brief history on printing. Sounds good.
So there we go. Shell scripts is part 4.
Yeah, I think you got to learn how to do shell scripts in Unix. Linux.
And that's it. Exotica. Ooh, that sounds fun.
Woo-wee. Hardcore Linux.
Strings connection.
Top.
All right.
Ooh, look at those processes.
Exotica.
Yeah, well, same thing with PowerShell, right? Like I have this PowerShell handbook that's sitting on Paul's desk, and it's like every time I go there, I open it up and say, "Let me see if I can remember one PowerShell command." Right out the door the next month, I have no idea what it is. So it's any kind of shell. I find that Linux shell commands stick more for me. I don't know why. They're not sensical. Like for some reason, they just stick in my brain. So. Okay, so 4 to 6 meetings is my guess. I think you're looking at 4 to 6 meetings.
Yeah, I'm thinking 4.
4 to 6 months. 6 is too much. Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Fair enough. Well, we did what? This was 4, right? 3? No, we did 4 on this one. Yeah.
Yeah.
4 is about.
Always 5.
4 is about right. No, 5's not an option.
5 is right out.
All right, so we'll go with try to make it around 4 months, and then we'll do functional programming after that. So, thanks for coming out, everybody. Take pizza if there's leftover pizza, please.